Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
In the morning, Susan felt better physically, but her mental state was terrible, and as if to make it worse, an investigator came to her room. "I need to interview you." "It won't take long. Don't worry. I'm told you're feeling better. There's nothing further threatening your health." Easy for him to say. How can a man understand the condition of a woman who's lost a child? And the investigator continued, "The doctors told us that there is a poison in your body, quite rare. Accidentally, it could not get into your body, and in connection with this, I must ask a few questions. 1. Do you have any enemies?" It all started as a long-awaited happiness with a rare celebration, a reunion of high school friends, 20 years after graduation. As it happened, Susan had never seen many of her classmates after graduation. Their school was in the old neighborhood, and just by the 10th grade, the families of many of the boys and girls got new apartments and moved away. Graduating class, some of them had already traveled from the new neighborhoods almost across town. And after graduation, Susan's family left, and a new life began, an institute, new friends. First years, Susan longed for her native places, came to visit those who stayed to live in the old house, and in the school somehow came, but then it was not to that, and other attachments appeared. And now, as an adult, an established woman, she was going to meet, in fact, with her childhood and youth, and as she secretly admitted to herself, with her first love. Although there was no love, that is, romance such as in old movies show, she and Sebastian, the first handsome man of the class, and not only. They did not walk hand in hand, did not kiss furtively in the public garden, under a lilac bush. Alas, all this was only in Susan's dreams. In reality, there were only her bitter tears in her pillow, because her beloved did not pay any attention to her. That is, he did, when it was necessary to make her laugh, to embarrass her in front of his friends. By graduation, she couldn't tell if she loved Sebastian or hated him. And after graduation, they never saw each other again, which Susan was happy about, although there was still a void in the place of that failed first high school love. Would he come or not? Susan thought, getting ready for the meeting. And what had he become? Was he married? "I thought he was going to law school." "No, I'm not going to talk to Sebastian about my long-lost love, and I don't hope that we'll be able to make something work now." "Oh, I'm just curious. And not just about him, but about a lot of other people. There's Kevin. He seemed to have a crush on me. Kept looking at me in class. Or is it the obnoxious John? I hope he doesn't show up at all. Although I hear he married our first honors student. How interesting it would be to find out about everyone, who became who, how they changed, what they look like." Susan herself could not boast of success in her personal life, no husband, no children. In this, of course, is not the slightest fault of that Sebastian. She had much stronger crushes. There were also relationships, but it did not lead to anything. And not because of the fact that Susan something was wrong, not the beauty of her fate did not deprive her, not mind, and the character was golden, but first she wanted to finish the institute and studied very seriously. Her father by that time has already very seriously engaged in business and believed that the only daughter will be his best assistant. And while I wait for you to marry a good man, and even take, you will find a poor man. Don't sulk. I'm just kidding, but every joke has its own joke. Don't trust anyone, and in general, go ahead and learn it yourself." Susan studied well, without any encouragement, and her father's words motivated her even more. Her father relies on her, considers her capable of continuing his life's work, and his daughter did not want to disappoint him. So the search, at least a poor man, at least a reliable assistant, were postponed for later, after graduation. But barely had time to graduate from the institute as my mother fell ill. That is, she may be ill much earlier, but she never admitted it, much less complained. Quiet, modest woman, she used to live in the shadow of her bright, loud-voiced husband, strictly takes care of the house and relatives. Any indisposition, even a slight runny nose of her husband or daughter, led her to despair, forced her to develop vigorous activity to save the sick. And her fatal disease Procaroli Valley hid and from relatives and from themselves, and only when, apparently, it became unbearable, went to the doctor, but it did not hide. Even when she was diagnosed, urgently hospitalized, she did not talk about why she would have to leave home for the first time, perhaps, for the first time. It was nothing. Just a checkup, a week or two at the beach, and that's it. She comforted her daughter. You just take care of your daddy. I showed you where the chamomile tea is for him. Make it. He's got a stomach and eat right. Don't go to my place. I'm well fed there. I don't need anything. Of course, Susan called the information desk the same day to find out her mother's condition and was struck dead by the response of the woman on duty. Oncology ward, go ahead. The next day, they went to the hospital with her father, both to see her mom and to talk to the doctor. His words were even more horrifying. How could the disease be so neglected? If only she had gone to the hospital a year earlier. It's already stage 4. Of course we'll start treatment, and don't be so frightened. Hope for the best, but she never complained about anything. Father was breaking his fingers. I beg you, I'll sell everything for any money, just so long as she's alive. She doesn't complain now. On the contrary, she's eager to go home, and we'll probably discharge her soon. You'll continue your treatment at home. Money can't solve everything. Moreover, I will tell you that it will not always help. Don't throw away that money, and don't torture the patient. It's her optimism that gives me hope, and it may be the best medicine. Susan and her dad walked out of his office, wobbling with grief. Couldn't Mom be helped? They tried to cheer up in front of the room, but Mommy, as always, understood everything from their faces. Well, I told you not to come. You're just scared for nothing. How could you not be scared? I can see they're both turning green. Look at all the really sick people lying here. And what about me? Yes, I'll be discharged one day and everything will be the same. And in this hospital, I agree, the air alone would make any healthy person sick. And discharged her discharged. But what is there still? A terrible disease, every day changed Mom, took away from her strength, did not allow to hide her condition. At home she was treated, faithfully took medication, even said that she was getting better. But what better? A year later she collapsed. Susan had to quit her job, learn to be a nurse, a caregiver. Well, it's all for the best. If something happens, and you know how to give first aid and give a shot, my mom used to joke, although God forbid that these skills are needed. Be well, both of you, may you be well. Don't cry, my daughter. I'm not saying I'm dying. These pills are making me feel better. I'm sleeping very well, and I'm completely healthy in my sleep. But not in her sleep. Mom melted away and died 2 years later. Her father's grief prevented Susan from mourning her mother. She began to fear for his condition. Always cheerful, active, not discouraged, he seemed to be deprived of the necessary nourishment. His wife's illness and on him and affected him not in the best way, and her death in general turned not old yet a man into a weeping weak old man, with shaking hands. How is it, my daughter? How come we didn't keep our mommy safe? Every now and then, he said. How can we live now, my dear? Susan was afraid that her father would seek solace in alcohol. But no, he didn't need it. He always looked like a drunk. Her daughter tried to bring him back to work, realizing that it was the only way to save her, but her father was no longer interested in anything. He went to work, frightening the employees with changes in his appearance and behavior, and Susan was already doing all the work. No matter what question or advice she asked her father, the answer was the same. "What difference does it make, Susan? Do what you want. You can't get your mom back. Then what's the point of all this?" In the end, Susan called a doctor. A person can't just melt from longing like sugar in boiling water. It turned out that in addition to depression, the father has a serious heart problem. A year later, after the death of his beloved wife, and father died, exhausted, as everyone who was aware of what was happening said, Susan became the sole owner and manager of the entire business. True, there were some kind-hearted people who wanted to become co-owners of the partners. What's a girl to do with a load like that on her own? "You'll ruin your father's business," they told her. But Susan wasn't such a girl. She was already 26, and for the last few years, she'd been carrying everything on her own, and she'd managed very successfully. On the other hand, they started coming around. "You need to get married. A year or two more and you'll be an old maid. Marry a reliable man, have a baby. That's your woman's business, and a husband can handle the business." They began to bring her grooms, and this Susan, completely disgusted from the thought of the need to arrange their own fate. Maybe among those young and adult men were worthy, maybe even dreaming of a relationship and marriage, but also about the company too in each. She saw some mercantile interest and recoiled with fear. She could not give her father's business in the wrong hands. And she herself did not want to become an annex to the firm. That's how she lived 10 years alone, not really burdened by loneliness. Well, yes, sometimes very much wanted to become, finally, the mother of the family, to take care not only of the business, but also of relatives. But with each passing year, the possibility of realizing this dream all weakened. Dreams remained. In them, she had both her children and her husband. And this husband more and more often acquired the features of Sebastian, unfulfilled love. That's why Susan was going to meet her former classmates, with excitement and anticipation of some changes. And in general, she wanted to unwind. Not so often happened in her life holidays. Yes, at work sometimes organized corporate parties. Sometimes she was invited to visit a few relatives. Her mother's cousin, her father's brother's family, that's all the fun. But what fun is there? At the corporate party, she is still the boss. You cannot relax completely. And relatives, you come like a holiday and everything is as it should be. The table is set, salads, baked chicken, homemade pickles, Napoleon cake, and talk. And I'm still waiting. Susan, when you and your fiancé come, or even your husband, I want to see your kids. Why are you shaking your head? It's time. You're over 30. What are you waiting for? You've got your beauty and your mind. Who else is going to be married and bring up children? After such a holiday, you go home with an unpleasant feeling, although you realize that the aunt wished you well and spoke sincerely. But who needs the sincerity? And here, after all, there was a meeting with those whom she had known many years ago as children, and now she was to see them as adults, but also to show herself and boast of her successes. Because Susan believed that not only family is the most important thing in a person's life. Yes, she is not married, but not because her 5 husbands left her, and she alone now brings up 5 children, and not because no one needs her. She may have other interests and other achievements, and not a small one, because in her business life she succeeded, and she looked very good. I remembered how my aunt sometimes sighed at the TV. I wonder how people age differently. That artist. We're the same age, for God's sake. Yes, she's 2 months younger than me, but you'd think she's 20 years younger. They're like dragonflies, and sometimes I can barely crawl. Well, you compared our life and theirs. Her husband consoled her. What about my life? I did not carry stones, and she not only vacationed at resorts. They have artists. Life is not sugar, too. Touring, rehearsals, all sorts of travel, and that not to mention the nerves. It's just that you can marry her, but I'm in a home for invalids. Tell me too, and who are you going to marry, bride? Uncle was joking. Jokes are jokes, but we must think about what Susan should wear tonight. Maybe, of course, in a simple, youthful way, in jeans and a sweater. They're high school friends, but they're not high school friends anymore. And his business suit is also not an option, not a business meeting, decides want to relax. For the same reason 2 fancy outfits are not suitable, not a fashion show after all, and she is not a model. It is necessary to dress smart, beautiful, but not flashy. She's not going to arouse envy either, and in whom? Her classmates? They had a good class, no marginalized people. No one became a media personality either. There are no artists, writers, or any other celebrities, so she has to look accordingly. Although Susan, it must be admitted, has achieved more than many. Yes, she has something to be proud of, but she is not going to show her superiority. She chose a beautiful dress, but not provocative. She also did her hair herself, quite restrained, with jewelry is not overdone, and was ready for the exit. The gathering of those wishing to take part was appointed at school in the assembly hall, and on the way to the school, a petite beauty rushed up to her. Susan, you? Oh, you look gorgeous. You're so beautiful, and what a car. My husband dropped me off and left. What an asshole, chirped Doll Beauty, in which Susan easily recognized a former classmate. Cindy, I'm so glad to see you're still so dainty. No, I've grown 2 mosquito heads. Susan laughed happily. She was really happy to see the smallest girl of their class and to hear her doll-like voice. Who's coming over there? Oh, is that James Clark? He put a frog in my briefcase in 6th grade, so I'm gonna get back at him. I think that's Molly and Robert. They got married. We have 4 couples. Can you believe it? Come on, let's go. Finally, everyone was gathered, seated in the auditorium, and the former students were greeted by the teachers who had grown old and sweet. It is even strange that 20 years ago someone was afraid of them, someone frankly disliked them. Also, classmates, what kind of good grown-up people have all become? It's hard to imagine that once these same people were nasty, mischievous, and fought. Susan looked around furtively, but Sebastian was gone. One of the girls suddenly pulled out a thick notebook that looked familiar to many. Look what I have here. This is the questionnaire that everyone here filled out in 10th grade. Let's remember what we were like 20 years ago, what we dreamed of, and who had what come true. Everyone leaned over the notebook with interest, hardly recognizing their youthful revelations. They regretted that most of the questions were not so interesting and important now. Well, who cares what movie I liked back then? Here, let's talk about who wanted to accomplish what. Here's Cindy. I want to be loved and be loved. Did it come true? It came true. I divorced my first husband, but through no fault of my own. It was a mistake, but I'm happy now. My second husband and I have true love and a beautiful daughter. Kelly, you wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. Did it work out? Unfortunately, no. At the insistence of my parents, I graduated from a technical college, but I don't work by profession. Only my own kindergarten. I had my third boy a year ago. Well, we'll make that count. Clara, a junior high school teacher, and how? Teacher, but high school. I'm trying to teach math to the same people we were recently. Even with the overachievement, well done. That's James, but there's a bit of a joke in there too. I want to be bold. I want to be brave. I want to rip your clothes off. Whose notebook is this? Yours, Lucy. You and James got married, and this one's a total hit. Now you're Susan. You're going to go to school and carry on your father's work? Yeah, I had to. Although if I'd written a couple years earlier, it wouldn't have been the same. But look at everyone else's writing. But Sebastian, I'll be a judge, and then you'll be on your own. Joker. Where is he, by the way? He's not here, but he said he'd be here. I called him. I heard from one of Sebastian's old friends. There he is. There he is. Cindy shouted triumphantly. Remember what the punishment for tardies used to be? Scrubbing the floors after class. But we don't have class today. Laughing, Sebastian, who showed up later than everyone else, shook hands, hugging, recognizing his grown-up friends. Susan stood up to meet him too, and for Sebastian it was as if everyone around him had disappeared. He was looking at her with that look she had longed for in the past, but now what? Now it's a grown, respectable man, probably married. That's why he was late. Probably asking for his wife, I guess. Hello, Sebastian, she said to break the stupor. Or what should I call you now? Your Honor? No, my dream didn't come true, although I became a lawyer. True, now without a job, just left the firm where I worked for 10 years. I just realized that there will be no development there. So I don't know what title I'll be honored with yet. And you and Susan, your ladyship now, you must be glowing. I won't be offended if you call me that. Susan laughed. She wanted to remind him how he had called her names in childhood, but she bit her tongue. There was no need to spoil such a wonderful evening. Meanwhile, the festive part was over. Everyone moved to the banquet hall, where the conversation became more lively. Then the dancing began. Sebastian, of course, invited Susan, and more than once. She, remembering that she was driving, refused alcohol, but she still felt drunk with happiness, back to the days of her long-gone youth. Her dream had come true. It was Sebastian who held her in his arms, her gently spinning head resting on his shoulder. After such a wonderful encounter, would they have to part again? He whispered compliments, spoke of his admiration, but nothing more. Susan already knew that Sebastian was not married, but apparently he didn't need her either. At the end of the evening, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Sebastian, take my card. Call me if there's anything wrong with the job. My old lawyer at my firm just quit 6 months ago. I hired a young one, 3 years out of college, you know. So I'm looking for someone more experienced. You're always welcome. And shortly after that evening, a new lawyer arrived at Susan's firm. To the great displeasure of the previous one, Alvin Togo was not fired, but was made Sebastian's assistant. The young man, also very smart, did not quit, but no one knew the true reasons. He stayed with the firm, having received, whatever you say, a demotion, not because he was afraid of being out of work. Good lawyers everywhere are worth their weight in gold. The reason was much deeper and more serious. Alvin was secretly in love with Susan. But it never occurred to her, but what kind of love would that be? The guy was 12 years younger than her, and small signs of attention, like the appearance of fresh flowers on her desk, a cup of her favorite coffee for lunch, she attributed it to the subtle courtesy shown by colleagues, and maybe Alvin himself, but only out of respect. Sebastian, however, began to court her quite openly, which delighted Susan. He did not seem to be burdened with loneliness, that is, she managed to convince herself of it. In fact, what are the difficulties of a single, but quite well-to-do, in addition, a city woman? There is no mowing in the city, as it was written in some book, and physical help was not needed. But lonely evenings, what is it like? Especially for a young, beautiful woman striving for an active and interesting life. Especially after 30, it became difficult. At first, Susan, demonstrating independence, boldly went alone to the theater, concerts, exhibitions. It seems that such events do not go to socialize with gentlemen, but alone turned out to be painful. One to come, at intermissions to sit in the hall, crumpling in his hand program, one to leave, and no one will not help to take off your coat, no one then will not get it in the check room, will not serve. Everyone goes in pairs and is so alert, attentive to their companions, but she is alone. No one to talk to on the way home, to discuss what we've seen and heard. No, it is better to sit at home, though alone, but no one knows it. And if we don't respond to the phone calls, then maybe they'll think that Susan's gone on a bender. So what? A woman is lonely. Take a walk, take a walk. For the same purpose, she sometimes bought herself flowers, and on ordinary weekdays returned with bouquets. Let them think she wasn't lonely. What she didn't want most of all was to be pitied. And now she had the opportunity, if not to walk, then to walk, just to come out of her shell. Rarely a day Sebastian didn't invite her to a restaurant, theater, or some other cultural event. And if they did without it, they just walked the streets and talked. So much news has accumulated over the past 20 years. That is not news anymore. But that's for whom, how? They had to get reacquainted. They didn't talk about their school past. Unfortunately, there was nothing to talk about. Susan confessed that she was in love with him and resented his relationship. Yes, I was a fool, but honey, don't you realize I was head over heels in love? I didn't know how to express it. A lot of guys do that. Teasing, pulling pigtails. First grade, yeah, but 10th grade? But enough about that. It's funny to take offense at things that happened long ago. I mean, really, now that we're together, I can make it up to you, right? I guess so. And I guess I'm finally happy. Susan felt happy for the first time, and so did Sebastian, who was not only winning Susan's heart, he was almost the boss of the company. Not even a year later, the owner had written a general power of attorney for him, which meant that he had full control over all matters and finances. To the chief accountant's somewhat perplexed question, Susan replied, "What's the big deal? Sebastian is already fully aware of everything, and he and I are getting married. Yes, the application has been filed, and we're getting married in a month." The news traveled around the firm. Someone rejoiced for the lonely to this boss, although some, of course, admired the dexterity of the young man. And there was one person who was truly saddened by this news. Alvin. He still held the position of paralegal and was sitting idle more and more often, Sebastian less and less often privy to his affairs. It frustrated and annoyed the young man, but for the time being, he was dying to be near the woman he loved. Perhaps he hoped for reciprocity, that someday he would be able to confess his feelings to Susan. But realizing that Sebastian had beaten him to it, he wrote a statement and went to his boss to sign it. Upon reading the application, Susan raised her eyebrows. "What's the matter?" "Everyone seems to be happy with your work. And that's why I don't have a job, in fact. And anyway, I can't work forever as a junior assistant to the head janitor. Can I? I've got to develop myself. Well, I can't keep you." Susan was indeed a little sad that this young man would be leaving the firm, but not for personal reasons. For her, there were no men other than Sebastian. Alvin was simply a competent and promising lawyer, not at all superfluous in his position. But she signed the application and said goodbye to the young man warmly, writing him a solid bonus for good work. A month later, there was a gorgeous wedding of Sebastian and Susan. Happy newlyweds received congratulations from colleagues and relatives, rejoiced at the changes in their lives, and sincerely believed that their happiness will not end. A few days after the wedding, they went on a wedding trip to a fashionable resort. How wonderful to be happy! Susan exulted quietly. And just to have a vacation from everything in the world except love. I haven't had a normal vacation in all these years, it seems, so I took a week sometimes to sleep. And then suddenly I have the sea, the sun, and you. You are my sea and sun. Sebastian replied, I swear from now on you'll be on vacation like this, several times a year. Alone? Susan pouted. And who will stay in the shop? Sebastian laughed back. It's such an inconvenience to work together, and with such responsibility. We're sunbathing here, and they're already dismantling everything. I've got a 100 times tested team. You don't have to worry about that, but a few vacations a year, I agree. It's not gonna happen, and together. Well, we'll see. I mean, our happiness is just beginning, right? It really was. After returning from vacation, the couple started working with renewed vigor. Susan had one more wish, though, and that was children. And she was aware of the fact that there was not much time left for its realization. The years were flying by so quickly. She herself did not really believe that she would be able to become a mother, and therefore she did not share her dreams even with her husband. And at the end of the first year of marriage, when she first felt some unusual ailment, did not immediately suspect what was obvious, and certainly did not share her suspicions with anyone but a doctor, a gynecologist from a private clinic, whose services she had been using for many years, and there the best suspicions were justified. After a comprehensive examination, the doctor congratulated her on the fact that in 7 months the baby would be born and was surprised by the woman's reaction. She ducked her face into the palms of her hands and cried, "What is it?" "Are you not happy?" surprised the doctor. "I am happy. I just can't believe my happiness. I'm 40 years old. Isn't it too late? Am I giving my baby everything he needs? Well, as long as it's in me. Will my body be able to handle it? What are you worried about? If you'd had a baby every year or a dozen abortions, but you haven't. Your body's been preparing for this event, and as far as I know, it's gonna be fine. Probably more than once. So you can go home and make your husband happy. I hope it's good news for him, too. I bet he will, because we're the same age, and he and I have never had children before." On the way home, however, Susan decided to hold off a bit on the happy news. She and Sebastian would have their first wedding anniversary in a week's time, a very appropriate occasion to announce it during the celebration, for now they would have to rejoice alone. However, that joy was suddenly overshadowed by a call from an old friend. "Susan, I'm sorry if I'm upsetting you, but I think you should know this. I was walking downtown today, and I was shopping, and as I was walking past the restaurant, you know, the one next to the shoe store, it has these big windows. So, through the window I saw your Sebastian at one of the tables, and he was not alone, but with a very interesting blonde. Thank you. How much do I owe you for this information?" Susan said dryly, "I knew I'd be left to my own devices. It's my fault. My friend was upset. I believe my husband. It must have been a business meeting. He has to meet with his partners a lot. I do not know if with business partners are accepted so cooing, then of course, what can I understand in it?" A friend interrupted the call, and immediately sent some photos. On them was Sebastian. He was really sitting at a table in a restaurant, tenderly holding the hand of a beautiful girl. They smiled at each other. It didn't look much like a business meeting. Susan felt the blood drain from her face. To poison a happy day like this. Though yes, what did a girlfriend have to do with it? But Sebastian can't be cheating on me either. Surely there was a simple explanation. In the evening, she without further ado laid out her phone in front of her husband, with those very photos, and looked questioningly at her lover. And with growing horror saw that Sebastian became nervous. He was clearly confused, did not know what to say, then asked sadly, "Are you spying on me? I didn't think you would stoop to such a thing. It would not have occurred to me. It was an acquaintance decided to open my eyes on your pastime. Congratulations. You have very observant friends. I envy their husbands. Except they didn't do you a favor. They ruined your anniversary surprise. In the restaurant My Soul, I was dining with a client and his lawyer, this very girl. The client left, and I stayed with her. The girl, as you can see, is young, doesn't understand much, so I tried. No, not to deceive her, but to turn the case in our favor, you know? And it's gonna be a very lucrative contract. If I manage to pull it off as planned, we will be able to rise very significantly. For several years we will be secured, you know? In a week's time, it'll all be up and running, as they say. I'll refrain from details, let a little bit of intrigue remain. As it is, I'll have to think of another present." Sebastian had a look of displeasure, a jokingly pouty look, and Susan, of course, melted. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I swear I didn't doubt you for a minute, but you know I had my doubts. By the way, I have a surprise for you, too. A very nice one, I promise." So they made up. Before they could quarrel, trust was restored. Each in his own way prepared for the celebration of the first anniversary of marriage, not realizing that there was a man living nearby who trusted Sebastian, every day less and less. It was Alvin. Yes, he had not forgotten Susan, the woman to whom he had never dared to hint his feelings, and the feelings remained, both for Susan and Sebastian. They were the exact opposite, though. Yes, Alvin disliked his colleague at first sight, which was not surprising, because Sebastian had displaced him in the place that Alvin considered his by right. Perhaps the more senior lawyer had more reason to claim the place, at least experience, but that was well understood from the outside. The appearance of Sebastian, whose relationship with Susan was no secret to anyone, was a serious defeat for Alvin, and an even more serious reason not to like or trust the man. Working together, he noticed some oddities, but there was nothing he could do about it. No one listened to him. After he found out that Susan was marrying Sebastian, Alvin realized that nothing further depended on him. Now he could do whatever he wanted. Suspect his enemy of the worst sins. It won't change anything. Susan loves him, and Alvin. Well, Alvin? At his existence, she simply forgot before the door closed behind him. You shouldn't have dragged it out so long. You could have confessed sooner and let it be. Let's say she'd have laughed in his face, thrown him out of sight. So what? That's how it ended anyway. But then I'd know I'd done everything I could. And she would know that I'm not just an inexperienced lawyer, but a man who loves her and would do anything for her. And this Sebastian, well, I've worked with him. I've seen that he's not exactly a star. I don't know what he will bring to the case to which Susan gives all of herself, but that's their problem. It doesn't concern me anymore. These were the thoughts that plagued Alvin for quite some time after his dismissal. Why did he procrastinate and delay his confession when he had the opportunity to see his beloved woman almost daily? He explained it to himself honestly and very simply. He was afraid. But what would it be like? He, having barely got a job, where he was taken, most likely, just for a trial period, for an internship, and suddenly begins to explain in love, and who, the owner of the company, his boss, chic, business, but older than him in age, and also much more wealthy. What would one think of a guy who would dare to make such a confession? Will Susan not be offended by such a courtship? If she does not even chase him away immediately, will Alvin not become a laughingstock? A quick boy, our shooter has been everywhere, and got position, and a woman not the least, and all the firm in addition. Isn't that the kind of whispers he hear behind his back? Here and waited that he could somehow show himself, to make an impression on his beloved. If she herself had looked at Alvin not just as an employee, but there were no signals from Susan in his direction. Alvin, of course, had found another job after his dismissal, and even enjoyed success not only as an aspiring but capable professional, but also as a single man. Single women and girls paid attention to him, tried to impress him. But how were they to know that he looked at each one by comparing it to another, and in his eyes all women lose to Susan? It didn't matter that they were younger and more suited to his age. It didn't matter that they were single. They weren't Susan, and strangely enough, Alvin hadn't given up hope of still achieving this grown married woman. That is, he assumed that now Sebastian would somehow negatively prove himself, and that it would happen. Alvin had no doubt. And one day he had a chance to find out something about his happy rival. When he was dealing with a fraud case at his new job, he unexpectedly came across a familiar surname, Sebastian. True, he was a witness, but clearly had a much more serious relationship to the case, just to prove nothing. Alvin could not understand the case of 5 years ago. He lacked materials, or maybe experience, but he was interested in the case. Not only interested, alarmed, for if all was as he supposed, Susan was already in danger. And who can help her if his suspicions about her husband, who had unlimited access to all the affairs and finances of the firm? Not only that, but Susan's own safety is at risk. Fearful pictures painted the young man's imagination. He remembered everything he knew about Sebastian originally, that is, what he had told about himself and his past. From his words, everything was great. Brilliantly graduated from the institute, internship abroad, 10 years of impeccable work in a solid firm. Sebastian spoke vaguely about his personal life, except that he hinted at some tragedy, which left a heavy mark. Well, to check all this is not difficult. The check was not in vain. Sebastian had certainly graduated from the institute. The diploma was genuine, but here are the grades in it. Yes, this graduate was far from a red diploma. But further on there was such a confusion that Alvin could not figure it out on his own. Realizing that he had reached a dead end, he turned to an old friend, whom he considered his teacher. He met with him and stated his request. The friend looked at the initial data, asked, "What's this? Alvin is a private detective, has decided to become a private detective. What's this Sebastian you're so interested in?" "Yes, there, William, rather personal interest is involved, but I want to expose the villain." "I mean, everything is a lie. And for what purpose? A good person could get hurt. That's what I don't want. A woman?" William winked. "Well, don't blush like a girl, you're young. I'll try to find out what's going on with this young man through my channels. It didn't look like much at first. You can expect anything from a guy like that." It took a lot of time to find out the whole background of Sebastian, but when a friend invited Alvin to the cafe to tell him about the question of interest, it became clear that the young man was worried not in vain. "What a fruit! You gave me Alvin. Next to him not only your good man, but as if you and yourself in danger was not. I'll tell you one thing, Your Sebastian didn't graduate from college for nothing. In the end, he learned to bury in a way that even Sterlitz would envy. So he worked after his studies in several firms and everywhere successfully, for his own pocket, but he almost always left like a goose out of water. Only at first, until he gained experience, or the wrong people ran into, even to the court case came to court, but even there the snake got out of it. So, 3 bankruptcies thanks to his activities, and all so neatly with white gloves. That's what I thought. Alvin sighed. Yeah, wait a minute. Those aren't his biggest sins. Firms, okay, he ruined those, he screwed those, but it happens. What can you do? He's not only that, he's also very unscrupulous in personal matters, which I think is even worse. Was he married? Alvin asked coldly. I wish. I tried not to bring it to that, though I had one marriage, but it was when I was young. Then I looked for ladies, rich ones, by interest, and then I left them, having taken something especially valuable. Here you go. One of them took her own life, after he had left her without money and an apartment. Another ran around the courts, but never got anything, and another one. Well, it's a murky story. After she met our client, she disappeared into thin air. What a nightmare. But why isn't he still in jail? Why? In the business part, he got away with it, but in personal matters, yes, he loved, then fell out of love. And the fact that it made someone else want to live, and someone else ran away, that's not a question for him. Money jewelry? You can prove he took it. He's got nothing on him, naked as a falcon. That's it. He can get away with it now. It's all on the account of his common-law wife, who's a nobody. No one knows how much she got. And now what? Alvin agonized over how he could save Susan now. And now what? Now he's clean as a whistle. He's officially employed by a reputable firm, married to the owner of the firm. I wouldn't give a dime for her life right now. There's a woman walking on a cliff like that. Is she the reason you brought it up? Yeah, Susan, but they've been married a year. But he's been sitting tight. Now he's gonna make a move. If this Susan means anything to you, you're gonna have to go to the rescue. But how do I know if she'll want to be saved? Alvin muttered to himself. Yes, you forgot the main thing. You tell her that she is not the only one he has so-and-so. He has a few years already, as they say now, a common-law wife. Well, that is, he has been with her for a long time and firmly, apparently, they have not only personal, but also business reciprocity. This girl works in a pharmacy as a pharmacist. She hasn't been caught for anything yet, but who knows? So I'd recommend not sitting at the table with him, just in case. Here are the coordinates of this great love of his. Just in case, ask around, it might come in handy. She just bought a car, by the way. And I doubt that on her pharmacist's salary, she does not deny herself anything. Alvin thanked his friend and left the cafe, completely dumbfounded by the information he had received. What to do now? How to save Susan? First of all, he decided to collect evidence, and for the sake of this he made a small surveillance of Sebastian. Now he knew the address of this civilian mistress in labor. It was not difficult. Soon Alvin had pictures of Sebastian helping the girl out of the car, walking with her under his arm, kissing her tenderly near the entrance. But what to do with it next? Just show Susan around. Meet up and tell her everything I've learned? Ask her to be more careful? Any of those actions might not accomplish the desired goal, and they could easily antagonize Alvin, but it was dangerous to hesitate, and he couldn't help but agree with his friend. As a result, he decided to call his former boss and say that he knew something about her husband. I'm sure she'll agree to meet, and it'll be easier to get it all out in private. "Hello, Susan. This is Alvin, the lawyer you used to work for, remember?" "Of course, Alvin. Good afternoon." The woman wasn't exactly pleased, but she sounded friendly enough. "Oh, this is about to change. How can I put this delicately?" "I'd like to meet you, Susan. I have some information that might interest you." "What kind of information? Can you be more specific?" "The thing is, I'm running out of time, so I'd like to know how important it is." "Very important, and above all, for your safety. I'd like to tell you about your husband, Sebastian. Believe me, he's not quite who he says he is." "And who is he?" With a scornful sneer, Susan asked. "An American spy." "The Ussuri tiger?" "Believe me, it's very serious." In a pleading tone, said Alvin. "I have proof." "What proof?" she interrupted. "The pictures?" "I've seen 100 of them. We have enough envious people besides you, but I didn't expect it from you." "A young man, educated, well-mannered. Are you still angry about being fired?" "No one fired you. You left on your own." "No, I didn't. That's not what I'm talking about, honestly. I'm begging you, why don't we meet?" "No, Alvin, I don't have time for meaningless meetings. I love my husband and trust him." "Do you think he loves you?" Alvin asked hopelessly. "I don't think, I know. And I'll ask you not to call me anymore. I don't have time. Besides, this kind of talk makes me worry. Have a good day." And Susan interrupted the call. "Why are we so unhappy?" "Unpleasant conversation." Sebastian walked into the office without knocking. "I have to go to the bank to drop off some payments, so sign, Susan. You can do it yourself. Sebastian." Susan smiled strainedly as she signed the papers. "Come on, you're the landlady. So who was on the phone, Ethan? Is he asking for an extension again?" "No, Alvin, your predecessor. Imagine he hasn't been able to settle down for a year. Suddenly he says he's got some information about something. It's crazy, in a word. He's probably stoned out of his mind. Well, I'm off. See you tonight, my love. Do you really love me?" Susan smiled reassuringly. "What do you think? I told you this morning I couldn't have fallen out of love in a couple of hours. I won't fall out of love in 100 years. Sebastian ran away. Susan moistened her eyes. What kind of people are these? Someone else's happiness is worse than cholera to them. That's what they think, and Alvin, and that friend. That she'll divorce her husband after hearing their gossip? No way. She feels that Sebastian loves her. And tomorrow is their anniversary, which they decided to celebrate together, without any noise and noise, she herself insisted. After all this evening, she will tell her favorite the main news. They will have a child, and Sebastian will be happy. They'll wipe the noses of all envious people. Alvin, having finished that conversation, sat helplessly, biting his lip. No, he was not going to retreat, to leave the woman he loved without help and protection. Susan was in danger, but she was not yet able to realize it. She loved her husband like those other, deceived, robbed women. But he will do anything to ensure that Susan is spared such grief. Yes, having ascertained everything, she will probably suffer a lot, cry, but she will be alive and well, and Sebastian, the scoundrel, will get nothing. Better still, if it were possible to put him on trial, he deserves it. So he'll go to Susan's office now, tell her everything he's learned from William. He'll show the photos, suggest a trip to the house of Sebastian's mistress, and he'd better catch the scoundrel there too. And then the poor woman will have no choice but to believe what he says. Yes, most likely it will not add sympathy to Alvin himself, but there was no such sympathy. So let it all stay as it was, and maybe sometime later she would realize who the real friend really was. He thought hopefully. With such thoughts, Alvin and moved towards the office, hoping to catch Susan in place and alone, not always Sebastian hanging around. He was in a hurry, rehearsing in his mind the forthcoming speech, but Machine, as always, carefully watched the road. Alvin never broke traffic rules, and this time, coming to an unregulated crossing, he was sure that he had done everything right. He looked at the road, it was empty. But suddenly, when he reached the middle of the road, a foreign car almost silently came out of nowhere, and then there was a tearing pain and darkness. None of this Susan knew, of course. She was preparing to celebrate not only the anniversary of their life together, but also another, much more important event that only she knew about. It was decided to celebrate in a small, cozy restaurant, just the two of them. Susan, with a discreet glow, waited for the moment when she could tell her husband about her pregnancy. They ordered. Susan was very fond of different seafood. She ordered the pasta with ideas. While waiting to order, she couldn't resist pulling a pregnancy test out of her purse. And here was my anniversary surprise, and was unpleasantly surprised by her husband's reaction, the joyful anticipation on his face, suddenly replaced by bewilderment and fear. "What is this test? You mean you're pregnant?" he asked without any enthusiasm. "Are you not happy?" Susan was surprised. Now it was her turn to be scared. "Come on, honey." Sebastian pulled himself together. "I'm happy. It's just so sudden. That's why I was surprised." "Well, I'm happy, my dear." "Of course I'm happy. I thought you were frightened." The woman said, offended. "Who wouldn't be? We are no longer young. The emergence of a child, it is a risk, above all for you. It's such a strain on the body." "No, don't think so. I'm not discouraging you. I'm happy. It's just that at this stage, your health is more important to me than anything else." Sebastian's been very reassuring. "My health will be fine. Don't worry. I've already been to the doctor. Everything is fine. No complications are expected." "Well, thank God. Thank you for the good news on a day like this. I didn't expect it, really." The order came, but Susan went out first. She had to visit the ladies' room, and when she arrived, everything was ready. The couple began to celebrate. Not surprisingly, all the talk centered around Susan's pregnancy. "Is that why you ordered the juice? I was wondering why you wouldn't even have your favorite wine. You have to eat for two now, and you're right. Seafood is the best thing for the baby. Aren't you sick?" "Oh, come on, Sebastian." "It's okay, I told you. I'm just pregnant. It's no big deal." "Yeah, the flavor's different. I feel like every dish tastes unfamiliar." "Yeah, well, I've read about that. I don't know which book." This woman thought all the food was too bland. "Would you like some salt? Or would you like some seasoning?" "No, not at all." "Oh, I just said I was fine, and then I jinxed it. I feel dizzy and stuffy. Why don't you pay and let's eat?" "Wait, it's so nice here. Breathe deeply, drink some water. Or do you want a sip of wine? It won't hurt, but you'll feel better." No, I want to go home. Shall we eat?" "I don't feel well." Susan was already feeling very ill indeed, and was surprised that her husband, who had just been so concerned about her health, was sitting so indifferently, looking at her not sympathetically, but as if testing her. "Sit down, don't spoil the evening." In Sebastian's voice there was a cold chuckle, but his voice came out as if through absorbent cotton. Everything was blurring in front of her eyes. Susan tried to get up, but her legs buckled, and she fell as if she had dived into some suffocating blackness. An ambulance was called, and Susan was taken unconscious to the hospital, where she was immediately admitted to the intensive care unit. Only the next morning, the woman regained consciousness. She remembered everything: the restaurant, the seafood. "I'm sure she's poisoned. That's why I thought the flavor of those mussels was so weird. I'm gonna sue that restaurant. Oh my God, my baby!" The doctor came in, checked her reactions, calmed her down. There's no further danger to her health. It was a serious poisoning, and you're lucky the doctors were called quickly and responded appropriately. And that you didn't drink alcohol, or they wouldn't have been able to save you in time. But your child was less fortunate. You unfortunately lost him. How? That can't be true. I needed that child so badly. Is it because of the Dan mussels? I'm afraid the mussels had nothing to do with it. The doctor shook his head. I have already informed the police. A rare and dangerous poison has been found in your stomach. When your condition stabilizes, an investigator will come to see you. What condition? What investigator? My baby. Oh my God, I've been waiting for him. And Sebastian? She realized. Is my husband here? Did he poison himself too? No, he didn't come. And I think he's fine. Don't worry. Susan had nothing to worry about. Her long-awaited child would never be born. Here's Sebastian. Why doesn't he come? Yeah, well, they probably just won't let him in the ICU. They'll move him to the ward and they'll see each other. She was transferred to the ward the next day, but the first thing that came was not her husband, but the investigator with his questions about whether she had any enemies. What enemies? Not the waiters, not the cooks. No one knew I was going to be in this restaurant. Susan exclaimed, and Sebastian suddenly stood before her eyes. He looked at her questioningly and urged her, "Have a sip of wine. Let's sit down. Don't spoil the evening." So he wanted to keep her in the restaurant, wanted to aggravate her condition? But that can't be. Sebastian is her husband. He loves her. He was happy about the baby. And what did Alvin say about the danger? Why does Sebastian not come? For if they saw each other, all doubts would be shattered. She felt sick again and interrupted the investigator with an irritated question. "Are you trying to get the restaurant workers off your back? It's clear that I poisoned myself with their seafood. It tasted weird to me right away. The remnants of the dish you didn't eat were sent for examination. They were found to contain poison." The investigator sighed. It had nothing to do with the mussels or the rest of the food. Susan dialed her husband's number, but he didn't answer. Probably busy or driving to my place. Hopefully, the woman thought. But Sebastian did not arrive, and his phone was subsequently turned off. There was no strength to think about what it meant. Her condition improved, but then again she felt sick and weak, depressed, and sometimes unable to get out of bed. Only after 2 weeks, Susan felt that she could get up, walk, live on. And everything would clear up with Sebastian, probably, because he couldn't have disappeared without a trace. She looked out the window. The weather was beautiful. I should at least go out to the garden, get some air. This atmosphere is making me feel worse, she thought. She sighed, smoothed her hair a little, smoothed her hospital gown, and cautiously went down the stairs. At the first moment, the fresh spring air almost drowned her out. Susan wanted to ask someone to walk her to her room, but changed her mind. "It's nothing. I'll just stand, breathe, and come to my senses. I have to get used to the air of freedom and independence. There would be no one to pick me up from the hospital." She had already realized that Sebastian must have abandoned her. It was up to the investigators to determine how much he was to blame for what had happened. Susan did feel better, and she wandered slowly down the path, enjoying the rays of the sun, the pictures of waking nature. She didn't want to think about bad things, but nothing good came into her head, so she enjoyed the peace and thoughtlessness. The other patients were wandering the street, some alone, some apparently with relatives who had arrived. Suddenly her gaze caught on some familiar face, Alvin. It was he who strode hesitantly toward her, leaning on crutches, with his plastered leg out in front of him. She had been thinking of this young man recently. "Alvin?" Susan exclaimed. "How are you here?" The young man looked at her at first, as if not recognizing her. Then he perked up. "Susan, are you ill?" "I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you at first." "I am." He nodded at his leg. "Car accident, second day back on the road, learning a new means of transportation." "What about you?" "You've lost so much weight. And me, Alvin, I got poisoned." "You warned me, and I did." Talking to a man who looked at her kindly and sympathetically made her voice break. The tears themselves flowed from her eyes. "Come on, Susan. Let's sit down on the bench and tell me what happened." "Is it your husband?" "I don't know yet, Alvin." Sitting down on the bench, Susan replied, "The investigators are still looking into it, but judging by the fact that my husband hasn't shown up or called in 2 weeks, you were right. I understand the investigators can't find him either. They're on him though, right?" "That's good. Can you give me your investigator's cell phone number?" "Or he can have mine. I really need to talk to him. I already know something about your husband." "Yes, of course you do. I can't tell you anything. I'm so clumsy. Love is in my eyes, but he loves me. In the meantime, Alvin, tell me what you know. And one more thing. I'm sorry I didn't believe you that day. Who knows? If I'd agreed to see you, we'd both be well. No one can know that, but why don't we go to the ward or the lobby? It's getting fresh. You don't need a cold." They sat down in the lobby. Alvin began to tell everything he knew about Sebastian, about his previous jobs, about his relationships with women, and about the fact that he still had a mistress. "A friend told me he's an investigator. He found out everything. I was horrified. I rushed to you. That is, I called you first, but it's clear that you didn't believe me. I thought I'd come and show you the photos. Although you said you'd already seen it all, but everyone can't lie, especially since the investigator was here. So it's already a fact. Now I don't know what to believe anymore. I wish none of this ever happened, including the meeting with Sebastian. Then why did I go to that high school friends' night? Tell me something else. Why did you find out about Sebastian? Did you have something against him? Or did you find out something bad before? Before? Before I knew you, Susan, I fell in love with you. Don't you get it?" Alvin finally decided to speak up. "Yes, at first sight and forever. Now I'm cursing myself for not admitting it sooner. I mean, I should have quit my job first, and then I should have confessed, wooed, pursued. And then maybe there wouldn't have been a Sebastian. It's nothing, I'll just stand, breathe and come to my senses. I have to get used to the air of freedom and independence. There would be no one to pick me up from the hospital." She had already realized that Sebastian must have abandoned her. It was up to the investigators to determine how much he was to blame for what had happened. Susan did feel better, and she wandered slowly down the path, enjoying the rays of the sun, the pictures of waking nature. She didn't want to think about bad things, but nothing good came into her head, so she enjoyed the peace and thoughtlessness. The other patients were wandering the street, some alone, some apparently with relatives who had arrived. Suddenly her gaze caught on some familiar face, Alvin. It was he who strode hesitantly toward her, leaning on crutches, with his plastered leg out in front of him. She had been thinking of this young man recently. "Alvin?" Susan exclaimed. "How are you here?" The young man looked at her at first, as if not recognizing her. Then he perked up. "Susan, are you ill?" "I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you at first." "I am." He nodded at his leg. "Car accident, second day back on the road, learning a new means of transportation." "What about you?" "You've lost so much weight. And me, Alvin, I got poisoned." "You warned me, and I did." Talking to a man who looked at her kindly and sympathetically made her voice break. The tears themselves flowed from her eyes. "Come on, Susan. Let's sit down on the bench and tell me what happened." "Is it your husband?" "I don't know yet, Alvin." Sitting down on the bench, Susan replied, "The investigators are still looking into it, but judging by the fact that my husband hasn't shown up or called in 2 weeks, you were right." "I understand the investigators can't find him either." "They're on him though, right?" "That's good. Can you give me your investigator's cell phone number? Or he can have mine. I really need to talk to him." "I already know something about your husband." "Yes, of course you do. I can't tell you anything. I'm so clumsy. Love is in my eyes, but he loves me. In the meantime, Alvin, tell me what you know. And one more thing. I'm sorry I didn't believe you that day. Who knows? If I'd agreed to see you, we'd both be well. No one can know that, but why don't we go to the ward or the lobby? It's getting fresh. You don't need a cold." They sat down in the lobby. Alvin began to tell everything he knew about Sebastian, about his previous jobs, about his relationships with women, and about the fact that he still had a mistress. "A friend told me he's an investigator. He found out everything. I was horrified. I rushed to you, that is. I called you first, but it's clear that you didn't believe me. I thought I'd come and show you the photos. Although you said you'd already seen it all, but everyone can't lie, especially since the investigator was here. So it's already a fact. Now I don't know what to believe anymore. I wish none of this ever happened, including the meeting with Sebastian. Then why did I go to that high school friends' night? Tell me something else. Why did you find out about Sebastian? Did you have something against him? Or did you find out something bad before?" "Before? Before I knew you, Susan, I fell in love with you. Don't you get it?" Alvin finally decided to speak up. "Yes, at first sight and forever. Now I'm cursing myself for not admitting it sooner. I mean, I should have quit my job first, and then I should have confessed, wooed, pursued, and then maybe there wouldn't have been a Sebastian." Alvin? Susan, who had suspected something like that before, but thought it was just a normal youthful interest in a mature woman, was astonished. "But what are you talking about? I'm much older than you. It's just indecent." "What's indecent? Love? No, whatever you want, but you're the only one for me for all time." "What's age got to do with it? Men get old sooner, and now we look the same age. Ask anyone. So right now you, Susan, look half my age. A fragile, confused little girl next to an old man on crutches. But even so, I'll always protect and support you. Oh, Alvin, you have no idea how grateful I am for such words, and for everything you've done for me, but I assure you, your infatuation will soon pass. All young guys fall in love with older women, a lot of them. And it's important for women not to imagine things because it's so painful to be disappointed. I've been in love for almost 3 years. Is that not an argument? You married someone your own age and what? Didn't you get any disappointments?" Alvin shouted, but then he realized it. "I'm sorry, Susan. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I mean to remind you of something you'd rather forget. I'm not offended, Alvin. The truth is not offended, but let's forget your confession. It's not worth it. I'll never forget it. No, I'm not gonna run, jump, after you on my 3 legs. I realize you're not in the mood for that right now, but you should know that I'm always here to help you with whatever you need. I'm glad I could admit it. I'm sorry, Alvin, that I can't do anything to answer your confession, Susan said tiredly. I'll call the investigator tomorrow morning, tell him about you, give him your phone number. You have no idea how grateful I am for everything, and for your confession too. Now let's go to our rooms, or the nurses will lose us. I'll probably be discharged in a few days, but we'll see each other again, won't we? I hope so. I realize we don't have time for all that right now, but I don't think you'll be able to stop me limping someday. Maybe walking with a cane will make me look respectable. Alvin smiled. Susan returned his smile, though she looked a wreck herself. That night, she hadn't slept well, all the while remembering Alvin's words, his confused, sometimes belittling look. After what had happened, would I ever believe anyone? Even this boy who seemed so sincere? He's done so much for me. But even if he's not cheating now, the time will come in. No, I can't take another loss, she thought. The next day, Susan was discharged. She went to say goodbye to Alvin, said she had given the investigator his words and phone number, and there was no further conversation between them. I'm in a hurry now, Alvin. I have a lot of things to fix in my life and at work. But we know each other's coordinates. I hope we'll meet again and talk. I really hope so, answered Alvin. He took her hand, but did not shake it, but kissed it gently. Susan, unexpectedly for herself, bent down and kissed the young man on the head, then straightened up and walked away without looking back. She really had a lot to do. She called the office and asked them to send a car to pick her up. When she got home, she cleaned herself up in an hour, trying to wash away the hospital odors and all the worries of the last few days. Now she had to be businesslike, decisive, and strong. Walking through the apartment, Susan saw that Sebastian had already moved most of his things out. Well, that's good. Less worries, less memories. And hopefully he wouldn't come back. We should change the locks, she was thinking, and the rest of the stuff in the garbage bag and put it in the dumpster. But that could be done later. But for now she had to go to work, find out what was going on. Sebastian was making some kind of super favorable deal. We'd have to see how it turned out. She got there just in time, that is. She had already missed a lot of things. During the year of her almost reign in the firm, Sebastian had managed to slowly transfer quite substantial sums to his account. But all the claims were signed by you. What could I do? The accountant said dejectedly, I tried to inform you, but somehow you didn't pay attention. Yes, of course. No one blames you, Susan replied. She also looked at the plans for the new deal, which seemed intended to be a surprise for the wedding anniversary. Fortunately, the surprise didn't work out. With new sober eyes, Susan saw that the deal was not only unprofitable, it would be ruinous. Sebastian decided to transfer almost all the money to the account of a front company, apparently registered in the name of his mistress. Susan was in time. She managed to revoke the power of attorney and prevent this transaction from taking place. But what Sebastian had stolen, well, what can you do? There's no way to get the money back. But he'll have to answer for what he's done, and his mistress probably will too. It's unlikely he got the poison himself and poured it into her muscles. The next day, Susan went to the investigator, wrote a statement against her husband, accusing him of theft, fraud, and possible poisoning. She realized it would be difficult to prove anything, but her husband's past should have motivated law enforcement to track him down and try to prevent at least future crimes. This time the police, who had long tried to tie this man to any real crime, were quick to act. Sebastian and his mistress were detained at the airport. They already thought that the deed was done. Only happiness awaited them further, and the detention was a very unpleasant surprise. After all, they were already ready to celebrate their victory, anticipating a rich and happy life abroad. Yes, that Susan was still alive was a setback. Oh, Sebastian, I told you we should have kept her in the restaurant as long as possible and talked her into a drink, but I'm worried. Who knew that old fool would get knocked up? She's almost 40. A decent woman should be babysitting grandchildren at that age. Anyway, I called the hospital. They said she's in serious condition. I don't think she has time for that now. Well, everything's fine, and we'll be happy and free soon. The main thing is to get the principal into my account on time. Just during this conversation, the police approached the couple and asked them to follow them. How Sebastian did not rage, shouting that the boarding of their plane had already been announced. How his mistress did not beg him to let her go at least, as she has nothing to do with this man. Both were detained and taken to the detention center. Sebastian, outraged by the betrayal of his mistress, was not going to vindicate her. "What a bastard you are, Lara!" he shouted. "You have no relation, then? That's the man I've become. You want to blame it on me? Well, don't. What did you get my money for?" "What money? What else are you thinking? You planned the whole thing. You turned it around, and now it's my fault. No way. You can't put me away for nothing." The bickering continued at the confrontations, tiring the investigators to no end. However, thanks to these mutual accusations, a lot of information on the merits of the case became known. The role of Lara in the affairs of Sebastian, the degree of guilt in the poisoning of Susan became clear. "Did you really mean to kill your wife?" asked the investigator, who had seen a lot of things in his life. "Aha! I lived with her for a year and I wanted to. If I'd wanted to, she'd have been dead in a week. I wasn't even going to get a divorce. I could still use her. It was that snake. How did I know what she gave me in the bottle? She said Susan would just pass out and forget things, make it easier for her to manage. Don't listen to him anymore." Lara sobbed. He begged me to give him something to make that fool go away. "I told you not to pour out too much, half the visor only. And then she'd just get a little sick, and he'd transfer all the money to himself while his wife was in the hospital and go far away. He was the one who decided to pour it all out, especially since she was already pregnant. Susan really wanted to meet her husband, and the opportunity came, also in the investigator's office. The woman looked bitterly at the man she had loved so much in her youth and recently. After all, she thought that she would live with this man all her life, that they would be happy. "Tell me only one thing, Sebastian. How could you?" she asked, no longer hoping for an intelligible answer. "I could what?" "You couldn't. That's why I'm sitting here now." The man grinned. "That's not what I mean. You killed your child." "What baby? Did I ask you for one? Have you thought about whether I need a child?" "What do you mean you asked for it? Marriage is about having children." "No, but I still thought you were smarter than that." "What marriage? What kids? Now you think we had a bourgeois marriage. We had a union of interests. You got your share of happiness at your age, and I got my share of money. And if you hadn't been such an impenetrable fool, we would have parted too, to our mutual satisfaction. You should be grateful to me now that I got rid of that baby. An elderly single mother, wouldn't you agree, is not the best character." Sebastian looked at her defiantly and mockingly. "You were after me on purpose, weren't you? What if I hadn't come to the class reunion then? You've got a lot on your mind, sweetheart. I didn't even know about you. Well, you came along, so what's to miss? If it wasn't you, it would have been someone else. How many of you fools, who in the pursuit of money at 40 years old remembered that it would be nice to get married. You want love, and I'm a kind man. Give you love, but you have to pay for everything so that I could provide everything for the one I really loved. You could work. You had an education, right? So I worked as hard as I could. For you, working means working hard, letting life pass you by. But some people have other interests. So you dragged your sweetheart into it. You'll both go to jail now. Isn't that what you call life passing you by? Susan still couldn't understand what he was looking for. Well, we'll sit. We'll do time, but we'll get out. They won't give us a life sentence. Don't worry about us, honey. Worry about yourself now. You'll spend the rest of your life alone. Susan was not going to appeal to his conscience. There was no point in appealing to such people. Well, you're not afraid of the court. You're not afraid of prison. But there's another court, God's court, and there's a harsher sentence waiting for you. But this apparently did not frighten Sebastian at all. At these words, he simply laughed in the face of the woman who loved him so sincerely. She learned more about his pranks during the investigation. Yes, she is not the first victim of her lover. Such numbers he has done before. In recent years, he really paired with Lara, his accomplice, whose education and place of work allowed to neutralize in time, trusted women, slipping them various drugs. He could not achieve a stable income through work because he had failed in his profession. He studied with difficulty, and at the first place of work he showed himself so that he got into the unofficial blacklist. The first serious check, it could easily reveal. But Susan herself brought him to her company, so the personnel department accepted him without any checks. A friend of the missus. What are you talking about? As a result, Sebastian, for 2 years of work, managed to conclude several fake contracts, very even decent to heat his hands. And only Susan, blinded by love, did not see it, almost paid for it with her life and lost, perhaps, the only opportunity to become a mother. Now she remembered all the little bells that could have prevented the final tragedy. Not even bells, but bells rattling. Still she remained deaf, blind. Poor Alvin. He had warned her, and she had told Sebastian everything. Wasn't that why the boy was still in the hospital? Maybe that accident wasn't an accident either. Alvin was in the hospital. Susan visited regularly. He was recovering quickly from his injury, although the doctors warned that the limp might be permanent. He and Alvin had become real friends, though the young man clearly wanted a more important place in her life. But Susan still felt only gratitude to him, both for trying to ward off trouble and for helping the investigation because of his feelings, which seemed to resonate in her soul. She herself felt younger, lighter, being near Alvin. Sometimes it seemed to her that it was because of his love that she managed to be young and attractive, though she couldn't forget about the age difference. Yes, it happens that a woman of years falls in love with young people, even marries, but it's afterward, for while they are still happy as never before. Anyone can fall out of love and old and ugly. But why not let yourself be happy for as long as you can? I was happy with Sebastian too, even though it didn't last long, even though it ended so horribly, so disgustingly. But it won't be like that with Alvin. He's already proved his integrity. However, I have every reason to shun all men from now on. Then I should get a cat, sterilize it, and live together without fear that it would run away and live to a ripe old age all alone. And if I did decide to do something, I still have time to give birth to a child. Yes, I will be an elderly loner, but still a mother, not a hollow flower. So she thought, returning after another meeting with Alvin to her lonely apartment, from which, along with Sebastian's things, seemed to have disappeared and the memory of him. Alvin would sometimes start talking about his love again when they met, but Susan would stop him. If he did not try to start this conversation again, she became a little sad. I guess my Alvin got cold feet. Oh well, that's good. It's good for him and me. But the next time, it just kept happening. And Susan stopped again. Come on, Alvin. You'll meet a nice girl soon. You'll love her. Already met and loved. The young man replied firmly. Even before the trial, Susan filed for divorce to finally cut the scoundrel out of her life. She told Alvin about it when she came to meet him from the hospital. The boy was still walking with a cane, though otherwise fully recovered. They were both to attend the trial, both as witnesses and victims. The trial was a very serious one, involving some previous cases that had remained unsolved, and it soon became clear that Sebastian and his fake girlfriend would not only get away with it, but would receive the maximum punishment. Do you have any regrets about the way things turned out? I mean, about Sebastian. Susan asked Alvin as he walked out of the courthouse after a hearing. I feel sorry for myself for being such an uncommonly stupid person. Believing what? To whom? Not only did I get hurt, lose my baby, but I embarrassed myself. And why feel sorry for him? He knew what he was doing. There's no shame in falling in love. I love you and I'll always love you, even if you send me away for good. I'm not going to send you away. On the contrary, I want you back. My firm is without a lawyer, and he has enough work. Will you come? Susan smiled. You bet. If you asked me to be a janitor, to clean your entrance, I'd love to go. It would be a reason to see each other every day. And give me bouquets and coffee? Don't say no. I know whose job it was. Especially since you got fired, no one's done that. I'll give them to you every day if you let me. No, that's not necessary. We're not going to make people laugh. Susan smiled. So they started working together again. Well, everything is back to normal. Alvin thought. The only difference is that I confessed my love, but I got something like, my nose isn't big enough. But how do I convince her I'm serious? How do I get her to trust me? To love me? Alvin thought lost in thought. They often talked to each other, both at work and afterwards, sometimes going to cafes together after the end of the work day. Soon the trial of Sebastian and Lara took place. It was 6 months after the incident. Arrogance, bravado, sarcasm, all flew off this couple, only to find out that the jokes are over in terms, and they are waiting for real and not insignificant. And so, in fact, it turned out. After the verdict, Alvin and Susan went to a restaurant to celebrate the end of a long, all-studied case. I don't know, Alvin, maybe it's a sin to be happy about it, but I can't help it. I'm not so much rejoicing as celebrating the release from the nightmare, from the lies I've been living for the last year. And I really, really hope that nothing like this will never happen again in my life. I don't even want happiness. I just want release from the nightmare. I'm so tired, if you only knew. And so grateful to you for being there for me. I'm sorry I didn't believe you right away. I didn't pay attention to what you said. It would have been funny if you believed me right off the bat. Besides, I could be wrong, but I'm still the party that wants you to be okay and not have him around. And I believe you'll be very happy. I want to make you happy. No, seriously. Susan, is there any hope for me? Do I? Can I hope that for at least 5 years your feelings won't change? No, wait, don't say anything. 5 years is nothing, but they'll flow differently for us. You'll mature into a serious, solid man, and I'll be 5 years older. Oh, you again? I told you, it doesn't matter. Alvin was very tense as he decided to finally clear the air about the relationship. If Susan and this time will answer with a refusal, citing the age difference, he did not know what to do. Just get out of her life, not to annoy with his confessions and himself, and not to torment in vain hopes. Yes, that would probably be the best course of events. How many rejections do you get? They do. Susan crumpled her napkin nervously. Marry me? Alvin took the ring box out of his pocket and placed it on the table in front of her. I can't live with this uncertainty anymore. Either say yes or say no definitively, and I won't bring it up again. The woman, with slightly trembling fingers, took the box, opened it, and admired the ring with the red stone. Yes, Alvin, yes. I'll save the peace and freedom for later. Okay? Let's say we live another 5 years. For the sake of 5 years of happiness, I can risk 5 years with a man who I can see loves me and whom I also love. Alvin walked around the table, approached Susan, kissed her on the lips for the first time. The company at the next table broke into applause. Other visitors joined them. Congratulations and wishes of happiness flowed, and a few months later Susan and Alvin celebrated their wedding, attended by all their colleagues who also sincerely wished happiness to the young people. They did look very happy indeed, and were so. No age difference was noticeable, and Susan herself did not think about how old she was. It was the first year of her real life, and that year ended with an even happier event. Susan had given birth to a son, a healthy, beautiful boy. All the failures and misfortunes of the past could be forgotten, as could the age difference between the parents. Susan was at last completely happy and no longer thought of her years. She had more to think about than just some numbers.
New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
And she was invited for an interview. Julia was nervous the day before. She wanted the job. Julia needed it like air. It was a chance to get out of a financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else to find such a salary? That's why the girl was worried about what if she was not taken. What then again to look for a place waitress? Labor for pennies. Cab brought Julia to the country cottage village. Elite neighborhood, high, beautiful houses surrounded by fences. At the gate, the girl met a woman, an au pair. As Julia found out later, and in fact a person who had everything on her plate: cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer William was always too busy. Businessmen in general have very little free time. William met the job applicants in the living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes, perfectly styled hair with a slight square, an athletic figure. Yes, this man clearly paid attention to health and appearance. Juliet even cracked up at first. How to start a conversation with someone like this? To herself next to him, she suddenly seemed insignificant. Good morning. Warm. William smiled, and Julia's embarrassment vanished. The man's smile was open, and the kind William seemed at once like a man of his own. Hello, Julia smiled back. I'm here through an ad for you. It's very good. I'll tell you right away. I need a nurse for my daughter Sophia. She is in a very serious condition now, so it's not for everyone. She's being monitored by the paramedics. They're here every day. I could hire a nurse for Sophia, but how can I tell you? There's already a lot of pain in her life, a lot of people in white coats. I wish there was someone else there for her. You know, a young girl like you, cheerful, who knows a lot of songs and fairy tales, who can cheer up a child, inspire him, come up with some interesting activity, in general, to brighten up her leisure time. Why? What's wrong with your girl? Julia just couldn't help but ask that question. Who would know? William lowered his eyes. His face grew darker in an instant, becoming anxious and tense. Sophia, it's been examined everywhere. No one could understand anything. It's like her body is destroying itself. No signs of autoimmune aggression. She's been getting tests all the time. They do, but she's fading and nothing helps her. Poor baby, Julia exclaimed. The doctors are doing what they can. I have the means, as you can see, but they are not all powerful, unfortunately. Anyway, Sophia needs more than just a nanny. We have Adriana, our favorite au pair. She will feed her, give her medications on time, and we don't just need a caregiver either. Sophia is supervised by nurses. They do all the necessary procedures. Sophia is needed soon. A friend, a person who can bring her positive emotions. The doctors say it's very important in her condition. And looking at you, it seems to me that you're young, beautiful, cheerful, and you have a kind look in your eye. You can empathize. That's good. Julia nodded. She wanted to see Sophia as soon as possible. If she needed positive emotions, she would provide them. Julia was sure to cheer up a girl who had such a serious illness. To brighten up the gray, everyday life of the little patient, we'll find a way to make her life more pleasant. If you're ready to get to work right now, William continued, let's start a trial period. Let's say 3 days, and then Sophia will decide. Of course, you will be paid for your time anyway. But do you agree? Yes, nodded Julia. Good, William asked. Then Adriana will introduce you to Sophia. And I'm off. Business. As the door shut behind William, Adriana, a middle-aged woman with a surprisingly soft and cozy look, turned to Julia with a question. I used to talk to babies. Do you know what little kids are like? I have nephews, Julia nodded. Is that a good thing? Adriana shook her head. But Sophia is ours. She's an unusual child. I've already realized that. I guess Sophia hardly ever gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to get her interested in anything, but you have to. Sophia needs to be distracted from her pain, from her agony. And she needs to walk at least an hour a day. That's what the doctor said. I get it. Well, now let's go meet her. Julia followed Adriana up to the second floor and entered the nursery. It was a spacious princess room. A huge window let in a lot of daylight. Along the walls were racks of expensive toys and books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, and even a trampoline. A little farther away was a ball pool, and closer to the door was a bed. What kind of bed was it? A big, round one. Julia looked around curiously. She had never seen a room like this before. Was it all for one child? In the midst of this splendor, Julia did not immediately notice the little mistress of the room. The girl was lying in bed surrounded by large stuffed toys. There was a cat baton, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over his body, and a skinny pale 7-year-old girl, completely transparent and almost merged from the unhealthy color of her skin with the white bed linen. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the entrance with curiosity. Sophia raised herself up on her elbows, though it cost her great effort, and turned to Adriana. Who's that with you? The new rehabilitator. The difficult word came out of the little girl's mouth easily and habitually, and it felt unnatural. No, Bunny, this is your new friend. Her name is Julia. Will you play dolls together? Sophia got a little excited. Would you like to? I smiled at Julia. The girl evoked sympathy and pity. I like to play dolls very much. That's good. Adriana's not available. Can't Daddy play at all? Adults have a lot to do, Julia shrugged. That's why they can be boring sometimes, Sophia suggested. And the conspirators smiled. Boring, agreed Julia. Sophia laughed quietly. Well, I can see you're going to be fine. Adriana looked genuinely happy. Did you have fun here? I'm going to make dinner. Oh, and Sophia, you remember the nurse is coming to see you today, right? I remember, the girl frowned. Again, IVs. But where to go? Sweet Adriana kissed the top of the girl's head and left the room. Julia was left alone with Sophia. Well, shall we play? The girl turned to her ward with a smile. You have so many beautiful toys here. I can't keep my eyes open. You'd better read to me, the girl asked. It seemed that the short conversation had taken the last of her strength. Sophia sank down on the pillows, pulled the blanket over her skinny body, although the room was warm. Good, Julia agreed. She was surprised and horrified by the weakness of this child of 7. They are also Azers, such as Larry, Julia's older nephew. He is just the same age as Sophia. But he can't even sit still for 5 minutes. He's always getting into things, figuring things out. If the boy was suddenly in this room, he would immediately start jumping on the trampoline or going down the slide. Helen calls him the perpetual motion machine and Molly. Christina are not lagging behind her brother, although they are younger. Sophia is lying there, poor thing. What do you want to read about princesses? There's a book on the windowsill. Vera started to read it to me, but she doesn't have time to read it. It was a heavy, beautiful book with bright pictures. But the story itself, it seemed Julia some kind of silly, boring, predictable, and formulaic. She herself, as a child, did not like such stories at all. And let's make up our own story about these princesses. As Julia, I expected tired eyes, Sophia flashed interest. How to do it, she clarified. Very simple. I start, you continue. Sophia was engrossed in the lesson. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. She would ride in her racing car. Then the heroine would be kidnapped by a dragon and then rescued by the prince. The girl's imagination was running wild, which seemed to surprise Sophia herself. Then Adriana entered the room. Seeing that Julia and Sophia were getting along, she was pleased. The woman brought a lunch of mashed soup and stewed vegetables. Sophia grumbled. I don't want it, she said. I don't want to eat at all. I don't want any of this. Adriana looked at Julia. The woman was clearly waiting for her help. Let me feed you. Julia turned to Sophia. Each spoonful. Another princess adventure. I'll make them up as I go along. Can you imagine the stories I'll have to tell you? What do you think will finish your food or my fantasy first? It worked. The food ended faster than Julia's fantasy, but Sophia demanded more story. Adriana splayed out her hands in surprise, smiled, and walked out. Soon a nurse, Sophia, entered the nursery. Immediately on the gloomy one. She was almost asleep by now. Lunch and the story had tired her out. But it was time for treatments. IVs. Hopelessly asked the girl to the nurse. She nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt. You sleep later, and we'll have tea. Adriana pulled Julia by the sleeve. Aren't you needed here now? The au pair led Julia into the spacious kitchen, smoking cups of coffee and a flavorful cake that looked like it had just come out of the oven were waiting on the table. You, Sophia, and I see you're getting along. The woman smiled, looking warmly at Julia. That's good. Sophia had kicked out the previous nanny, but he's taken to you right away. I've already called William and told him all about it. He's very pleased and excited. He told me to take good care of you. I'm glad too. Julia smiled. Sophia is just a pity. My nephews are so noisy, so cheerful. She is lying on the bed. She can't even play. She has nothing to play with. It's scary. That's what the doctors say. There's a chance. No prognosis. Adriana shook her head. They can't even diagnose anything. They just treat the symptoms, that's all. Sophia will be better now after the drip. Take her for a walk after her afternoon nap for a while. William, the girl's father. I get that. Where's her mom? On a business trip. She has a demanding job too, that's why she can't babysit. I wish, Adriana sighed. Is Betty ours? She's gone. It was a difficult labor. The doctors tried to save the baby and didn't notice that the mother needed help. And she herself, Helen, didn't complain to them about anything. She was worried about the baby. But that's how it turned out. The day after the birth, Betty had a high fever. Checkup, ICU, this and that. Her heart stopped. Poor thing had some kind of internal bleeding. It's a rare case. And then there was Sophia in the NICU. She was born prematurely. It was a tough time. That's a shame. That's a shame, Adriana agreed. Let me tell you the whole story. Looks like you're gonna be here for a while. So you should know. William grew up in a well-to-do, close-knit family. A loving mom and dad, caring, attentive grandparents, a room of his own. Trips to the seaside every summer, birthdays, friends. William had a happy childhood, an equally happy youth. He graduated from high school with a gold medal. Thanks in large part to parents who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired William the best tutors. And foreign languages, and the boy studied in foreign camps and rest, and education at once. Vouchers to such places were not cheap, and it was not easy to get them. But what can't you do for the sake of your favorite son, especially if he is so desirable and long-awaited? William had rather old parents. They did not get a child for many years. The couple resigned, was with such a fate. But then, when there was no hope left, life suddenly threw a surprise gave the couple an heir. Needless to say, all of his mother's and father's attention from then on belonged undividedly to William. William was never shy of his parents. Yes, he saw his mother and father much older than the relatives of his classmates. But the boy, on the contrary, was proud of them, because William's father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the head doctor of the regional hospital. Everyone knew them, everyone respected them. It never occurred to William to be ashamed of his family. William grew up. His parents were rapidly becoming obsolete, giving up. When the guy was in his third year of university, his father died. Stroke, intensive care, coma, and all. William then, for the first time, felt like an adult. You bet, because he, a student, had to get into the affairs of the company, which his parents left the guy by inheritance. It was William, a teenager, who was interested in his father's business. He knew a lot, even had the right to sign. And yet still, at first, he entrusted most of the processes to the manager of the board, a longtime friend of his departed parent. Because William needed to study and support his mother, who had given up a lot after the death of her spouse. 3 years passed. William had just gotten his degree, just taken over his father's company, just starting to gain momentum. And then there's another blow. Mom this time. The kid was all alone. William felt miserable and lonely in his parents' big house. At least Adriana, the au pair and almost a member of the family, was there. She had known William as a baby and treated him as her son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her care to the young man, who had lost both his parents one after the other. It was hard on him. Adriana shook her head. Just a boy, but also. Work had pulled him through then. He had to decide something, to go somewhere, to hold meetings, to make contracts, and so on. That's what saved him back then. Time passed. William went from a young, inexperienced guy to a smart guy. A grip on the man, a talented businessman. Adriana rejoiced, looking at her ward. He grew older, stronger, more confident. The au pair wanted William to find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Then her heart would be at peace. Adriana was calm. Only he had no one in particular. Adriana said, "No, there were some girls hanging around William. He's a good-looking guy, wealthy. They're always on the prowl. But I met with one of them, and I didn't see anything wrong with the other. I didn't like them as counselors. And I didn't like them either. It seemed like they only wanted money from him. He's got a tail on his head." And then Betty showed up. William met Betty literally on the street. She was walking down the sidewalk in a hurry. Turns out she was going to a job interview at William's firm. Betty had recently been downsized. The factory where she had worked for several years, after the institute as an accountant, had suddenly closed. So Betty was looking for a new position, and William went out for a walk to clear his head. He even had a goal to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner. And that's when fate knocked the young people head-on, literally. Helen jumped out of the corner too quickly and ran into the unsuspecting William. It was like something out of a romantic music video. The bag slipped off Betty's shoulder and the contents scattered on the pavement. William and Betty rushed to pick it up. Did the girl harbor words of apology? William assured her it was okay and admired the girl's beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young people sorted out the bag and the things that had spilled out of it, they rose synchronously and smiled at each other. Well, William, as a man, made the first step, learned the name of the beautiful stranger, and then introduced himself. They walked leisurely and talked and got acquainted. When William found out that Betty was rushing to his office, he asked and immediately realized that this beautiful girl was his destiny. And it was not by chance that they met in such an interesting way. Rather than seeing each other for the first time in the office, it was more romantic, more interesting, more enjoyable. All in all, a real romance was brewing. Adriana had never seen William so happy. Betty turned out to be intelligent, understanding, kind. She and Adriana, and importantly, quickly found a common language. Sweet, sweet girl. And for what? And only such a fate, sadly shook her head Adriana. A couple of years after their acquaintance, William and Betty got married. It was a wonderful couple, harmonious, happy. There was love, mutual understanding, and respect between the couple. I am sure that her heart rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved. After all, Vanya, his wonderful, beautiful wife. Here with children, both decided not to hurry. Adriana continued the story. It was their common decision, as if they felt something. They traveled, worked, met with friends. And I, the fool, all in the old man's way. I advised them not to wait too long. I wanted to nurse their baby. But William and Betty lived on their own for 5 years after they were married. Were they happy together? No, they wanted kids, but not right away later while they were happy with everything. And then the news of Betty's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, but the whole household welcomed it with joy. Well, then it was time, Betty summarized. The baby had decided he'd had enough of waiting. Thank God. Adriana threw up her hands. I think you're having a boy. You're very beautiful, Betty. Girls take away their mother's beauty during pregnancy. But the au pair was wrong. The ultrasound confirmed that Betty was expecting a girl. A big, strong one. They showed me a picture of her. They take pictures of a baby in the womb now. And when I looked at it, it looked just like Betty. That's how our Sophia was born, just like her mommy. Sophia. It was Betty who chose the name for her daughter. William and Adriana didn't mind. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy didn't go too easily. At first, Betty was suffering from toxicosis. Then it seemed to subside, but it was replaced by other problems such as high blood pressure and swelling. The child was developing well, but the mother was suffering, melting before her eyes, refusing to eat, lying down a lot. The usually energetic Betty lacked the strength even to go downstairs. Adriana carried her food directly to her bedroom. The woman felt sorry for Betty, helped her in any way she could, and assured her that everything would go away after her daughter was born. Children aren't easy for women, Adriana sighed. Pregnancy had taken its toll on Betty. Who's to say? Julia shrugged, remembering her sister. Both of them had gotten babies relatively easily. Anyway, Betty went into labor much earlier than she should have. The whole pregnancy was threatened, so fortunately, the mother-to-be was in the hospital under the supervision of doctors at that moment. They tried to stop the process, but failed. Sophia was born prematurely. Weak, she did not scream. She was not placed on Alina's chest, not even shown to her. When it comes to newborns who need to stay in the womb for at least 3 more months, things are different. Sophia was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. The fight for her life began, and Betty and Lena seemed to be fine at first. Well, tired, of course, after childbirth. Well, anxious. She couldn't find a place for her daughter. It's all understandable, all explainable, and natural. The doctors examined the woman in labor, found no abnormalities, and sent her to the ward. Afterwards, serious symptoms appeared, but it was too late. William and I were all worried about the girl. Adriana almost cried. It was obvious that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember it all. They thought that the little girl would not survive. She was born too early. She was very weak. And then, when William received a call from the hospital in the morning and was told that his wife had died of internal bleeding, he could not believe his ears. It seemed to him that it was Sophia. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. But no, Sophia had made it. Stronger was the girl. Betty, on the other hand, was not. William, then the gray one, walked around, didn't sleep or eat for months. I thought he was going to die too, but he went away. I had to work. I had to pull Sotnikova through. To be perfectly honest, he didn't treat his daughter well at first. Blamed her for what happened to Lena. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't help it. He was angry with her, that's all. Sophia was discharged home. They hired a nanny for her. Someone had to look after the baby. Adriana was too old for that, but she enjoyed playing. Sophia took her around the yard in her stroller and talked to her a lot. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the love she needed. My father was not capable of that at that time. She is like a granddaughter to me, smiled the au pair. I accepted her immediately. But William, he long shunned the child, bought for her everything necessary, and sometimes went for a walk with her. And that was if I made him. He didn't take the initiative himself. And then one day Sophia got sick. The temperature was high. Nothing helped. She was throwing up. It was the flu. It plagued a lot of people back then. And the little ones took it especially hard. But anyway, Sophia went to the hospital again. The doctors didn't give any prognosis. And that's when William came to his senses, gave up everything. He sat by his daughter's bedside singing songs and singing, telling poems, rocking her in his arms, and Sophia. It was as if she felt her father's care. She was on the mend immediately. Our little girl was discharged, and William became a real father, loving and caring. Life went on as usual. William worked a lot, but always found time to spend with his daughter. Sophia grew up, pleased her father and Adriana with her excellent health and rare intelligence. And everything seemed to be fine. But Adriana was worried that William was all alone. It seemed to her that there would be no happiness for him until he met a woman. Only now it was a very difficult task. Chosen by William, she had to love and accept Sophia. Otherwise, a union was out of the question. Well, God heard my prayers, Adriana smiled. And William had Lucy, the beautiful Lucy. I can't take my eyes off her. She's smart too. She's got a baby herself, a little girl a little younger than Sophia. It's a great family. Lucy got a job with William, and it all started at a corporate party. So it's the usual story. Lucy was very good to Sophia. She often took her and her youngest daughter somewhere to an amusement park or to the movies. Sophia loved both Lucy and her little half-sister Nancy. She was truly happy. William and Lucy got married and started living together. Then Sophia started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, lack of appetite. Examination in the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations with famous professors, all this did not give any result. Doctors could not diagnose the girl was melting before their eyes. The first year, she was still on her feet. Adriana almost cried again. It was obvious that her heart was truly hurting for the little girl. After New Year's Eve, she had gotten very ill, and now she was so afraid for her. And it is not clear what kind of illness attacked our little girl. Lucy and her daughter temporarily moved into her own apartment. Just Nancy went to the garden to carry infections from there, and for Sophia, all this was extremely dangerous. So Lucy and William made that decision. And it comes from Lucy a lot, every day almost. She's good, Sophia is fair. They bring her goodies. They bring Nancy too, sometimes, when she's not sick. When she started kindergarten, it started. Sick day after sick day. So they have a wife with one child separately, and a husband with their eldest daughter separately. That's the family. Well, what can I do? That's the situation. It's a strange situation, Julia said. She was shocked by the story of William and Sophia. You could make a TV series. Well, that's just the way it is. The old woman waved her hands. Sophia, I can see that you get along, and that's good. Everything will be more pleasant with you. The days went by. Julia now lived in the room next to Sophia's nursery, but the girl often asked the nanny to stay overnight in her bedroom. Sophia had a very comfortable sofa there. Julia lay down on it. They talked before going to bed, holding hands. Julia saw Sophia. It was very important. The girl clearly lacked attention, even though there were many adults around her. William was a very caring and anxious father and a pleasant person to be around. They often had conversations about Sophia. The man always listened attentively to Julia, did not interrupt or argue, and asked the right questions. Julia also got to know Lucy. Adriana was right. Indeed, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, a real queen. But when Lucy interacted with Sophia, when she was adjusting the blanket on the girl, she smiled and stroked the little girl's head. Julia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was faking it. It was evident in seemingly insignificant details. The cold glint of her eyes, the squeamish movement of her lips, something elusive and very unpleasant. One day Julia had a strange dream. The girl found herself in some room stripped wallpaper, creaking, twigs, floors. She sat on a stool by a dark window through which nothing was visible and realized that she was asleep. She wanted to wake up, but for some reason she couldn't. And then Julia did not even realize where she had come from. Betty appeared in front of her as if out of thin air. Julia recognized her because she had seen Sophia's mother in pictures. Betty smiled sadly and looked at Julia with a warm and very soft gaze. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, illogical voice. "Watch out for Lucy. She's trouble. She's dangerous." Betty vanished into thin air, and Julia had so many questions she wanted to ask her. How to keep an eye on her on what? What is she dangerous? Julia woke up in a cold sweat. Or rather, as if she'd flown into her body, fallen into it. It felt strange. Betty's words were still echoing in her head. No, Julia didn't believe in the supernatural. But the dream, which was little more than a dream, was more like a journey through time and worlds. The strange dream wouldn't let go. The next day Lucy was gone, and Julia waited for her. She knew for a fact that this woman was involved in something bad. Lucy is somehow hurting this family and doesn't like Sophia. She doesn't sympathize with the girl. She just pretends to care. And how come the others don't notice this? Even the experienced, long-lived Adriana. Lucy showed up the next day, beautiful as always, brightly made up languid. First thing she did was go up to Sophia to say hello. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Sophia is thirsty," Lucy said, looking at Adriana. "Let me make her some cocoa. Come on, I fussed, the au pair." "No, I can manage. I feel like it. I want to do something for her. You're so thoughtful." Julia was silent. She was watching Lucy like Betty had asked her to in the dream. For some reason it felt like this was the big moment. It was as if Betty was there, telling her to be vigilant. Adriana was tending to the dough. Julia pretended to look out the window. But she was watching Lucy. And then there was Tanya. The woman deftly pulled a small vial out of her sleeve, dripped a few drops from there into the milk, and immediately hid the bottle back. Only a couple seconds, a few deft movements, but Julia saw everything. "The drink for the princess is ready." Lucy smiled. "Julia, give me her favorite cup, please." Julia obeyed. She silently watched as Lucy poured what felt like a mug Sophia glasses, with the image of characters of the girl's favorite cartoon. And I realized Sophia shouldn't drink it. She shouldn't. She must act. Julia pretended to slip. She bumped into Lucy, who dropped the cup from her hands. The glass fell and shattered. What spilled out onto the floor? "I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Julia fussed, grabbed a rag, started wiping, undoing the puddle, picking up the shards. "It's okay, I'll do more." In the voice of Lucy sounded poorly concealed irritation. Julia could not do it a second time. It would arouse suspicion. So she had to accept the fact that Sophia would get the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Lucy and Adriana were at Sophia's place, Julia squeezed the rag she used to wipe the cocoa into an empty tomato paste jar. She was going to take the liquid to be analyzed today. And needed to know exactly what Lucy put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just vitamins. Then there was no point in panicking. But something told the girl it wasn't. She had to wait 2 days for the test results. When Julia saw the statement, she was horrified. The drink contained a deadly poison, causing symptoms similar to those of Sophia. So the girl's weakness was due to her stepmother systematically poisoning her, just like in a fairy tale. Julia didn't know who to turn to with her news. Adriana, what can she do? William, he wouldn't believe her. What to do? Lucy can't be allowed near the girl anymore. She wants to send her to the grave, and she's almost succeeded. And yet Julia has the courage to talk to William. She told him everything about her terrible dream, about the cocoa, and about the examination. Julia was afraid that he would yell at her, call her out, kick her out, or what's more, accuse her of wanting to hurt his daughter. "You know," William said, looking at Julia, "I would. I'd probably fire you immediately after saying that. It's very strange, you have to admit. But just yesterday, I had an unusual dream too. Betty, she asked me to trust you just to trust you, nothing more. Why don't you just keep this to yourself and take a vacation? I need to sort this out. Adriana will call you when you can go back to work. Julia spent those few days on pins and needles. She didn't know what was going on at William's house, and she was worried about Sophia, who had already become attached to her. But William had said to wait for the call, so she would wait. Adriana called Julia when she saw her name on the screen. Worried about what she would be told, how did it go? Come on over. All Adriana could do was extort. We're in the middle of something. Come over soon. Sophia misses you. Very much. Julia didn't have to beg long. Half an hour later, she was already at William's house. The owner himself opened the door, still as calm and unruffled as ever. His appearance made it hard to guess what had happened. I want to thank you. The man finally allowed himself to smile. You were right, Lucy. She really wanted to. I'm afraid to say it out loud. Sophia wanted to poison that bastard. Adriana didn't bother. That's a lot to think about. I already trusted her. The story turned out to be banal and old as the world stick. Lucy was not going to put up with a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's favorite daughter. She wanted her own daughter Nancy to be the sole heir to William's entire fortune. Well, first she herself, of course. Lucy had once studied to be a pharmacist. However, she never worked a day in her profession, preferring to live off rich admirers. Nature generously gave her beauty, so that the opportunities for such an existence the woman had. Received in college knowledge was enough to think of a way to send the hated stepdaughter to the other world. A poison, and a poison that is difficult to detect in blood, tissue unless specifically looked for. Lucy poured the toxic substance into the food she cooked for Sophia. And the girl weakened, slowly fading away. There was nothing left to do. It doesn't make sense. Unbelievable. Everything Adriana couldn't calm down. Julia understood her. Indeed, Lucy's act was monstrous. How could she do that to a defenseless child? Sophia trusted her, loved her. So William installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen. It turned out that Lucy was putting poison in Sophia's food every time. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself, and sometimes she managed to drip from a vial into the food, probably cooked in it. I used my own hands to take it to Sophia, the poison. Anyway, Lucy was caught red-handed. She was now under investigation. Nancy had been taken by her father, a man who had wanted to communicate with the child for a long time, but was prevented from doing so because he was too poor to do so, too unworthy. Sophia, and everything will be fine, Adriana assured her. The child was not to blame for what his mother wanted to create. And Sophia, how is she? Sophia is fine. There was a ringing voice from behind her. Julia turned around and met Sophia's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she had the strength to walk around the house. A real miracle. The doctors said she would recover quickly. Julia. James walked slowly along the shelves of the children's store. It was a section for girls, so it seemed to both of them as if they were in the realm of pink and purple. Dolls, baby cosmetics, soft toys. It was mind-boggling. When I was in Europe, a guy bought his nephew a voice-activated robot. This is the thing. Maybe Sophia would like something like that. She's a girl, reminds me of Julia, and she definitely wants a cartoon character doll. We should try to find one. Maybe next birthday she won't want toys at all. Kids grow up so fast. It's amazing. We'll soon see for ourselves. James put his hand on Julia's rounded belly. The baby responded immediately with a still weak but tangible kick. A year ago, right after Sophia had been rescued from her evil stepmother, Julia had been in for another surprise. She continued to live close to Sophia. Sophia was recovering quickly, mastering active games, asking to take her for walks all over the city. The girl was still very attached to Julia, and that one still needed a job, and Julia had gotten used to everyone. To the girl Adriana, even William did not want to part with them. The adults initially decided not to tell Sophia the truth about what had happened to her. It was too scary a story, but the sensible girl managed to put two and two together, listened to something, thought of something. The story itself did not have a strong, destructive effect on her, as adults feared. Sophia took everything quite calmly. Everything is just like in fairy tales. The girl shrugged her shoulders. The little girl was coming back to life. In September, she went to school with her peers. And Julia was finally able to recover at the university, chose a correspondence department, because she had to not only study, but also work. However, her work was more like living in a family with her relatives. Sweet, cheerful Sophia, kind, wise Vera Petrovna, always busy, but polite and attentive William. With these people, Julia was cozy, warm, and comfortable. They took her in still and were very grateful to her for her rescue. Sophia, it is scary to think what could have happened if not for that terrible dream. They discussed this unusual event. First, Betty had dreamed about Julia, then about William. Adriana was sure Betty had broken through time and worlds to save her daughter. William only shook his head and did not give his opinion. And Julia, she didn't know what to think. Perhaps Lucy had aroused her suspicions at once. After all, she had not liked Sophia's stepmother at first sight. More likely, Julia was running through the thoughts in her head. It is possible that they were transformed into unusual dreams. Except that William also dreamed Betty and asked him to believe. Julia found it more difficult to explain. That day, Julia left the house alone. Sophia was doing her homework. Adriana was doing chores around the house. Julia had to drive to the university to bring some documents to the dean's office. Suddenly, James stepped toward her. Julia couldn't believe her eyes from the Chantenou hair. And him? He looked happy and confused, smiling, looking at Julia as if there was no one more important to him in this world. "At last I found you," he said, and without delay he pressed her against him. Julia did not understand anything, but she did not resist. She pressed against her lover, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think about James's betrayal, about his sudden disappearance. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple. James simply dropped his phone into the ocean during a walk on a steamer. Naturally, the gadget disappeared irretrievably. Julia was not registered in social networks, so he simply could not contact her. No way. James wrote letters, like in the good old days of letters and telegrams. But Julia had moved in with William and was hardly ever home. So the letters piled up in the mailbox and then for some reason disappeared. Julia remembered this moment. One day she came home and saw that the mailbox door was broken. Someone had opened the box and taken the letters for some reason. Maybe the kids. Maybe a nosy neighbor. In short, Julia hadn't heard from James, so she assumed he'd forgotten about her. Started a new life, betrayed her. I couldn't just drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. Without you, without news of you, it was unbearable. But I knew I would have to wait, and then financially I would be able to provide for us for many years to come. And then I could fly to you and explain everything. I had no idea. You're in some kind of dire straits. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I didn't know you'd been laid off. It's been so hard on you. That's it. Just an unfortunate set of circumstances. Julia was glad that her feelings and James' feelings were real. That there was no betrayal or deception in her life. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved. James now had a contract with a well-known producer in the capital. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, gigs, tours, opportunities to take his music to people who were ready to accept it. And money? Money, of course. James was even able to buy an apartment for the two of them. It was in the middle of a renovation. James and Julia got married. They were already expecting a child. Julia felt happy and loved. She no longer worked for William. And a grown-up Sophia didn't need a 24-hour nanny to take care of her. But they all remained friends. And right now, Julia and James were picking out a 9th birthday present for Sophia that might not have been. Julia decided at an early age. Girls are either beautiful or smart. The girl knew very well she could choose, and she chose to be smart. The example of her older sister Helen was in front of her eyes. Everyone around her admired her beauty. Her hair was light blonde, silky clean, her eyes mermaid green, a figure they call model-like. Helen from an early age was focused only on her looks. She read a lot, but it was fashion magazines with advice on makeup, diet, and so on. And Valen's girlfriends were exactly the same. Julia thought they were pretty, frivolous, fools. The mother, who lived alone 2 daughters, had high hopes for the eldest. If you marry Helen, we'll live happily ever after. Julia then was still a very young girl, studied in the 4th or 5th grade. The girl was frankly perplexed. How can one put the responsibility for her happiness and well-being on some other person? Did the mother, who had been burned herself, not make the right conclusions? Once Julia asked her mother directly, "You married your father for his money too. And he left us, went to a younger and prettier, even, and left nothing to you or the children, because she had a good appetite. And now you teach the tape the same thing, so that it is the same." Splash, nodded Mom. Helen is quite different from us. First of all, young, and secondly, she is much prettier than me. And she has me. It was me who had to come to everything myself, and I'll give you a hint and teach you everything. It will be good for you too, if you listen to me. Julia only sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful, kind, but too frivolous. Both her mother and Helen lived with rose-colored glasses on their eyes. They all dreamed of a beautiful life. They believed that looks were the determining factor in a woman's success. But that's about it. Julia differed from her peers in her character, always being pragmatic, responsible, farsighted. And she clearly understood that to achieve something in this life, you have to work hard. And the options that her mother and older sister had in mind, the rich male benefactors, were all unreliable, fragile, illusory. Helen jokingly called her little sister a nerd. Her mother was always trying to remake Julia, to impose her point of view on her daughter. The most interesting parent sincerely believed that she wished her child well. "I'm worried about your future." "Well, how can you not understand? You're beautiful, we got such. You got the best of me and your father. When you finish school, we'll find you a wealthy fiancé. Just don't be like that." Then like cheerful and smiling. "No, thanks. After school, I will go to study economics." Julia answered. "Well, do you know what the competition is?" Helen always started to argue at this point. "You either have to be 7 eyes in the head there, or you have to have a good deal." "Yeah," Mom sighed. "We can't afford commercial education, and you can't get in for free." But Julia, trying not to listen to the arguments of her sister and mother, strived for her goal. Day and night she sat over textbooks, looked for additional courses on the internet, mostly free, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in the local supermarket, had no money for her daughter's education, and her father almost did not participate in the children's lives, as he had a new family. No, he still transferred some pennies, but everything was limited to that. No communication, no support or help in difficult situations. Julia knew from childhood that he could not be counted on. The girl deep down wanted at least once to meet and talk to her second parent. It seemed to her that perhaps the character she went just in him, because the mother and Helen Julia did not resemble at all. But he did not seek to meet his daughters, and Julia, she didn't want to impose. And it was scary to face indifference, or even worse, dislike of a native man. Her father was a businessman who owned a chain of stores. She had no time at all for student parties, going to clubs, and other such entertainments. Sometimes, of course, she wanted to go out and have some fun. But the girl realized that every minute counted. Her time was too precious. Besides, there was no money. Her mother tried to replenish her daughter's card with a small amount every month. Julia knew that it was a significant part of her parents' salary and was very grateful to her. It was not enough, very little. But still, it was the help from her mother that allowed Julia to stay afloat. Especially after the 3rd year, when suddenly something in the university clinic changed, and students were obliged to pay for the dormitory. And before, you could live there for free. Julia saved money on literally everything. But she didn't have time. She knew that she was going to her goal, which meant that sooner or later everything would be fine. Everything will be as she had dreamed. But on New Year's Eve, there was an event that made Julia reconsider her plans and turned her whole life upside down. It happened at that hectic time when before the New Year students try to pass all credits in time to start the winter session after the holiday without debts. Julia was just preparing for a credit in economic history when she received a call from her sister. Helen's picture popped up on the screen. On it, the girl smiled widely and looked like a star. Julia immediately realized something was wrong. Helen would not call her at the third hour of the night. It's her. Julia is awake, studying for her exams. And her sister should be having her 7th dream by now. Mom's in trouble. Helen's voice rang through the phone. It seems that she was close to hysterics. Come over. What's wrong? Julia felt her limbs grow young and her stomach felt empty for some reason. Anxiety squeezed her heart ice cold, and a bus hit her with a rusty hand. What when she was alive? But it was impossible to get any intelligible answers from the Italian. She was already sobbing and sobbing into the tube, dropping only a few insignificant phrases. Mostly they were wails about how she was scared and bad now. As if the trouble happened in the evening, but Alina was informed only now, just a couple of minutes ago. And she immediately dialed her sister. Of course, there was no talk about any credits and exams at that moment. In the morning, Julia took the first flight home. She was almost the only passenger at the bus station at such an early hour. Julia found her sister in a terrible state, her hair shot up, her face swollen with tears. In her arms, she held her youngest daughter, a very young Molly. Helen was already a mother of many children. Her eldest son Larry, then 2 girls, Christina and Molly. None of the fathers were involved in raising the children. Princes, sons of rich parents, refused to raise offspring and bathed in pennies with the elements. With Helen, they were just having fun, with nothing serious in mind. And that one kept stepping on the same rake on purpose to get pregnant in the hope of finding a happy, strong family. If something happens to her, how will I be alone with them? Helen looked at Julia with confused eyes, as if expecting her to offer a way out. But Julia, she was ready at this moment to hit her sister unbeknownst to her mother. And she only thinks of herself. How it happened. They had a corporate party, and Helen is machine carrying her daughter. Drunk, I guess. They told me Mom was crossing the road in the wrong place. Jumped out in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. He's kind of in the hospital now, too. He had a heart attack right there on the spot. Bye-bye. By the time we got there, I got a call late last night, and I called you right away. So Mom's alive. Julia checked. That was the most important thing to her. What hospital is she in? Morozov's. Julia jumped out of the house and called a cab. He seemed to be making good money. But all his property was prudently written down to his new wife, so that his ex-wife and children would have no claim to anything. It looked ugly, petty, even mean. In theory, Julia should have been just as resentful of her father as her mother, just as Helen was. But Julia had a dream. To study economics, start her own business, and one day meet her father on a case. A joint project, a lucrative contract, something like that. Let him see what his daughter had accomplished on her own, without his help. And then maybe they can talk on equal footing. And Julia achieved her goal. She got into the Faculty of Economics, where she was so eager. How happy she was when she saw herself on the list of enrolled. Screamed right in front of the computer monitor, jumped from happiness to the ceiling. She went crazy. Helen came into the room with little Larry in her arms. She had recently become a mother and given birth to a son by a rich man. He paid child support, but he did not want to communicate with his mother and Larry himself. Needless to say, these alimonies were pennies. Standard scheme of gray earnings, most of the income is hidden. Helen was just like her mother, even in an even worse version. But she was not going to give up and continue to dream of a prince who will surely sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her eldest daughter in everything, adored her grandson. This is not surprising. Julia also gladly fiddled with the baby when she had time. But the girl did not understand how it was possible not to draw conclusions from what had happened. Wasn't it clear? The plan is not too good and often fails. It was time to choose another option. But no, Helen still hung out on dating sites, looking for bigger prey. I got in, Julia explained her strange behavior to her sister. Wow, cool. What, you're going to the city from us now? You're going away to study. Julia and her family also lived in the city, but in a very small, remote from the regional center. Gray 3-story houses, whole streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. Julia's university was located there, and everyone called it that. Her mother, too, was happy to hear about her youngest daughter's enrollment. She had never hoped for such a thing. As it turned out, thought, let the little one, to show off, and when she realizes that nothing worked out, will go in the footsteps of her parents in the supermarket for the cash register. Well, and will think, finally, over the words of more experienced relatives. Realizes it is necessary to look for a rich and reliable man. And here's how it turned out. She did it. Good for you, daughter, Mom hugged Junior. I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sorry, I can't send you a lot of money, but at least a little for food, for housing, for being. Again, you need to dress nicely. In a big city, there's a better chance of meeting a decent man. Mom, you smiled at Julia again. She was touched by the fact that her mother supported and understood her, and even offered to help her. Julia knew. It's not easy for a mother to get that money, but she's willing to help her daughter while she's still a student. And that's priceless. Julia had a new life. She was given a room in the student dormitory, but not a separate one. The room had to be shared with 2 girls, but the roommates turned out to be very nice. They both studied at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, just like Julia herself, were focused on their studies and work. In general, the girls had a lot in common. With one of these neighbors, Valia, Julia even became friends. They kept their relationship even after they graduated from each of their universities and moved to rented apartments. Julia liked her studies. She was convinced in the first year that she had chosen the right direction. She found economics easy. The lectures seemed interesting. And term papers and tests were incredibly easy. Julia even started earning money. It turned out that people are willing to pay a lot of money for essays and projects. Big it is by Julia's standards, of course. The girl had to work part-time and study a lot. She needs to get there as soon as possible. She has to realize she's with a loved one. At the hospital, Julia was told the terrible news. Mom's gone. She had just recently passed away. At the moment when Julia rushed to the clinic, everything happened in the intensive care unit. The doctor then said that there was no chance of a good outcome. The injuries were too serious, and Julia would not have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma, and still the girl fed herself for slowness, for not supporting her mother by the hand, while she was still not. Julia was signing some papers when she received a call from Helen. She had been informed by someone on the nursing staff, and now the older sister was in a state of near panic. It had been a difficult time, arranging the funeral, trying to bring the sister who was supposed to take care of her babies no matter what, and the gradual realization of the terrible fact that the nearest and dearest person in the world was now gone. Just know, that's all. The father did not show up at the funeral, although he could not have been unaware of what had happened. This man did not even call his daughters, did not try to understand whether they need his help. Probably thought they were adults. They were both over 18. So legally, the father was no longer their debtor. He paid child support until his daughters came of age, and there was nothing more to expect. It was then that Julia realized that she would not meet and communicate with this man, even when she reached the heights of her career. He didn't need Lenka and Mama, and they didn't need him either. No resentment. No, it's just that Julia suddenly realized that her father is a complete stranger to her. They may look alike in some ways, but he's a stranger, just a stranger. And that says it all. Helen, on the other hand, is a stranger, and she needs support. Helen cried nonstop for days. Julia didn't stop her. Let her cry. It would make it easier for her. While her sister was dealing with her grief, Julia helped her with her nephews. The little ones made her smile even in such a terrible situation. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their cute babbling. Nephews, like nothing else, showed Julia life goes on. Julia could not stay long with her sister. Winter session. Helen had already recovered a bit, and even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted even more to have a supportive adult by her side. Her mom was gone. In spite of everything, Julia passed the session with honors. That meant an increased scholarship. This money would not even be enough to rent a room for a month. The dormitory became paid because it was necessary to eat, dress, and pay for transportation. Julia tried to combine her studies and work in the cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible at once a lot of passes and debts were accumulated. As a result, the girl did not even get admission to the next session. Expulsion loomed ahead. Teachers took into account the previous merits of the girl and went towards her. But she still failed. The only way out was the transfer to the correspondence department. Only here's the catch: budget places were all taken. The commercial option cost a fabulous amount of money for Julia. The rector offered a way out. One day he called Julia to himself and offered her the only, in his opinion, suitable option. "I know your situation. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy." So began the conversation a man who always reminded Julia of Carlson. Just as good-natured, full, and short. "Student, you are diligent and promising. Such a one wants to help. That's why I'll close the session for you, no matter what. Let us draw the lines of the movie. And you take a sabbatical for a year. I'll help you get a job for family reasons. Raise money for school. You'll make it. You're a man of determination. And then when you stop, I'll help you with all the details. What do you think?" Julia thought about it. She didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session is not passed, that's for sure. So, expulsion. And where to go? To go home, to her parents' apartment. So there's already a new suitor living there, a young and kind of nice guy, Stepan. Unlike the previous aluminum suitors, he's not a rich major. The guy works at a construction site, working from dawn to dusk, earning money. Seems to love Helen very much and has taken in all of her children. Maybe they'll actually have a family. Julia is completely unnecessary there right now. And she doesn't want to live with her sister. No, Julia loves her very much. She is the only person in the whole world who can be related to her. But still Julia is used to peace, solitude, freedom. And there's a family with many children. You can't do that there. And after all, she doesn't want to leave Orkovsky. It's a big city. It's beautiful, spacious, interesting. Here there are more prospects for work and study. The urban-type settlement, where Julia spent her childhood, was associated with rage and hopeless longing. No, she didn't want to go back there at all. "You know, I'll probably take advantage of your offer." Julia smiled at the rector. "What a smart girl," asked the man. "You're good, you'll do well. Just don't forget to save for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We will be waiting for you. Deal? It's a deal. Thank you very much for the offer." That same night, Julia started looking for a job. She urgently needed money, just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head. The most effective motivation of all. It turned out that it was simply unrealistic to find anything close to the desired profession for a girl with an incomplete university degree. Julia was rejected everywhere. Employers did not even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl realized that she could show herself at the interview, but it did not even come to that. After a couple of days of fruitless searches, Julia realized it was time to part with the dream of working as an economist. Or rather, to postpone it until better times. In the meantime, it is necessary to find something. When the bar was lowered a bit, things went better. Julia found a lot of vacancies: waitress, cleaner, salesman. But the wages were meager. No, it would be enough to live on, especially if you save money. But Julia had to save up for a year of schooling. With those salaries, it was impossible. And yet Julia needed a job. Immediately, she chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. The arguments for this place were enough. First of all, there was extra pay for night shifts. Secondly, tips were very helpful, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, the last job gave Julia the opportunity to write term papers and tests to order. And an extra penny in the piggy bank and brains are not idle. Total pluses. Work in the bar Julia even liked. The team is friendly, the bosses are loyal. The audience is decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about reputation. The atmosphere here was controlled. Undesirable elements were kicked out of security and never allowed in again. And another. Local band musicians and performers and visiting guests gathered here every night. In general, live music. And it was beautiful. Julia listened to the musicians' performances with pleasure, singing along, dancing. This in the bar was only welcomed. Going to work was like going to a holiday. In the bar, Julia finally understood the meaning of this popular phrase. Of course, with a waitress's salary, there are a lot of urgent things to do. Julia, in parallel, was looking for another job, more highly paid. But the girl knew even when she had to quit, she would come here to visit, just to be in this amazingly warm atmosphere. The rock bar and new friends helped Julia through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother did not go away, but the girl was finally able to come back to life and believe that there are still a lot of good things ahead. It was in a rock bar that Julia met James. One day, the host introduced the guests to a new rock band, which appeared just a couple months ago. James was the bass player. But not only that, he was the one who had the idea to create this band. He was the one who wrote the songs and the music. Modest, always kept in the shadows, but continuously observing all the behavior of the band members, the reaction of the audience. James was the main man in the crew. Although on stage most of the attention was drawn to the lead singer, you could feel it. It was noticeable from the first glance. For some reason, Julia immediately singled him out and reached out to him. She did not recognize herself. Julia realized that she was not in a position to fall in love and have affairs. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on her recovery at the university. She couldn't be distracted by all this. She couldn't be distracted. And yet, James did not study and did not flirt with waitresses, did not talk to anyone first. He was serious, focused on his work. Perhaps that was what bought the girl off. James was very much like herself. James began to appear often in the bar, sometimes with a group to work, sometimes just in the company of buddies to relax. Of course, they soon got to know each other, but he still acted kind of aloof, didn't show open sympathy. Sometimes Julia caught his eye though, but James would immediately turn away and talk to someone else. And Julia wanted him to pay attention to her, to compliment her, to give her signs of attention, as visitors often do. And then Julia would let him know that she was interested in him. One day in the company of James was a girl. This representative of the beautiful half of humanity came with him before, but they were just friends, girlfriends, other members of the group. This one was clearly something between us and James. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing like that, but sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled very warmly at each other. Once she laid her head right on his shoulder, and James, casual, cold, and even stern, stroked her hair in a natural and very gentle gesture, as if she were a kitten. A very unpleasant feeling was beating in Julia's chest from behind the collar. She recognized it immediately, of course. It was jealousy. With surprising scrupulousness, Julia began to pick out her rival's flaws. Too thin, not even pretty either. It's a nose, long hair, a little too liquid. Anyway, how could this madam be as good as Julia? For the first time in her life, Julia seemed to feel smug about her looks. Nature had endowed her, like Helen, with beauty. Julia had heard many compliments from others about her figure. She is tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends generally advised her to try herself in a modeling agency. Only this work was not to Julia's liking. Well, she did not know how to show herself, even somewhere that humiliating it considered it. And here, despite such impressive external data, the rival Julia was such a blue stocking. In general, there was nothing outstanding in James's companion, not even an eye to catch on. Nevertheless, he clearly had very tender feelings for her. Her presence made him happy. Julia watched James carefully and could tell that he loved his companion. It was painful, thanks to the girl that is. So to James, Julia had made up her mind. Decided to do something she had previously considered unacceptable to herself. Her shift was coming to an end, But per usual, she stayed late to help a waitress friend serve tables on a Saturday night. There were a lot of patrons. Julia waited for an opportune moment. She even had a little drink beforehand for courage, to feel more confident and relaxed. James stood up and headed for the exit. Someone called him. The music was blaring in the bar. It was impossible to talk on the phone in such an environment. Everyone went outside, to the porch of the bar or to the smoking room. James chose the street. Julia followed him like a shadow, now or never. The obnoxious girl who had been sitting next to James all evening stayed at the table. She chatted merrily with his buddies. You could see that they had all known each other for a long time. Probably a long and serious relationship. And yet still Julia will try otherwise. Otherwise, she'll regret later that she didn't even try. James stepped out onto the porch. He paced the square in front of the bar, patiently explaining something to someone. Julia watched him through the large window on the door. James was not smiling, not joking. Did he see the conversation was serious or unpleasant? It didn't matter. Julia would still approach him as soon as she did. James pressed reset and was about to go back to the bar, but Julia came out to meet him. Luckily, they were alone on the porch at that moment. "Hi," Julia smiled at him. James looked at her with interest. "We've said hello, and I think we already have." Julia nodded at me. "I need to talk to you." James immediately stopped, tuned into the conversation. All his appearance showed that he was ready to listen to his interlocutor. He could have brushed her off or shown irritation or displeasure. But James looked at her with his dark and intelligent eyes and waited. "I like you, and I've liked you for a long time." Julia decided to get right to the point. "I don't know how to explain it. I'm magnetically attracted to you. It's never happened to me before. Aya, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this." Julia lowered her eyes. There, she'd said it. What's next? James was probably just now finding the words to stitch her down as politely as possible. He probably was. Julia suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of her action. Why had she reached out to him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? James comes to the bar a lot. And then Julia felt his hands on her shoulders. A gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Julia, the name itself, as it escaped James's lips, sounded like beautiful music to the girl. Julia, I couldn't even imagine such a thing. James looked at her and smiled. He so rarely smiled. His eyes. The girl could see it clearly. They shone with happiness. Sincere, genuine. What's going on? Is he happy for her confession? Instead of words, James kissed Julia. The girl felt dizzy from it all. He was hugging her. More precisely, even held, because the girl's legs were literally under the painting kissed. Then he stroked her back and head, gently pressed her against him. I've been watching you for a long time too, and I'm attracted to you in the same way. Then why? I didn't even notice it once. I thought you didn't care. I didn't want to embarrass you. I don't. Anyway, I'm older. Older for you. I thought you were attracted to other guys, brutal, successful. With your looks, anything's possible. You're beautiful. You're unreal. You even inspired my song. Didn't realize I'm an Olympic princess. Is that about you? No, Julia confessed. It's a very beautiful song. I love it. I didn't even realize it came from you. Oh yeah, that's right. And that girl who came with you. Are you two together? We are. James couldn't help but chuckle. Together. Ever since my parents brought me back from the hospital with a pink bow and told me that Svetka was my sister. So she's your sister. Julia laughed out loud. I thought so. That's why I decided to have this conversation today. Sister, sister. James held Julia tighter to him and breathed in the scent of her hair, just passing through town. She's been married a long time, living far away with her husband. She misses the brotherhood of her troublemaking brother. Julia and James started dating. Turns out he's been sympathizing with the pretty waitress all this time. Why didn't he make any moves on her? I was going to. But later, when he's a little more cash flush. He had a clear attitude in his head. Girl, I'm interested in losers. So far, there was too much to do with the band, organizing performances, and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And oddly enough for a rock musician, was James shy around girls? No, he had a lot of friends with whom you can chat, laugh together. But Julia, she evoked in him a very special feeling, and that made James, used to performing in front of hundreds of people, cringe. But Julia made the first step, thus shattering all of James' doubts. And now they're together. James himself suggested moving in together. They decided to choose Julia's apartment. Convenient location, adequate cost, cozy room. So it was James who moved in with her. But he immediately took upon himself the payment of rent and minor repairs, which every dwelling needs from time to time. And it also turned out that James is an excellent cook. Julia's culinary talents just pales in front of his skill. James, as befits a creative person, created real masterpieces. Whether in the recording studio or in the kitchen, he was gentle, sensitive, and attentive, fully immersed in his work, but not forgetting about his beloved. They talked a lot, often went for walks. Sometimes they discussed the next song together. It happened that Julia would suggest to her beloved the necessary phrase or words. He happily grasped the idea, and then the girl felt proud of herself. Well, how? Participated in the creation of a hit? Julia completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting James, she did not know what it is love for a man. She had no time for that. First studying hard, then trying to survive. It turned out to be so pleasant to be near a man who embraces you, interested in your mood and well-being, looks at you with admiring eyes, as at some princess, and melt from the touch of warm, strong hands. Knowing that he, this tall man with black eyes, would do anything for you. Helen didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, she had her own yardstick. He's poor, he doesn't even have his own apartment. Again, no steady job, no business. He's a musician, he's got his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There's a lot of these one-day bands out there. We don't know if they'll succeed. I think you got the wrong guy. With your looks, you shouldn't do that. It's okay with me. I have 3 kids. Who needs me? So I'm content with what fate gives me. I don't complain. But you? Julia didn't expect her sister to understand. They were always too different. But Julia didn't need understanding. She was happy, she was loved. She had someone close to her. Yeah, he was going through a rough patch. But James tried, went to his goal, worked hard, looked for the right contacts, planned something. Julia supported him in all his endeavors, and he appreciated her devotion. Many times he said that he was grateful to fate for such a gift, for her. One day James undertook a rather risky endeavor, inviting a famous rock band to Orkovsky. It was planned that his band would perform as a warm-up act for the famous musicians. This event was to increase the popularity of the band James. Well, and in general, the organization of such concerts is a way to earn good money. But something went wrong. Not as many people came to the concert as planned. There was a big rock festival in a neighboring state. James didn't take that into account. Or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already in full swing. In general, James went into a big disadvantage: payment of musicians' fees, rent of the hall and equipment, tickets for the rock band, promotional activities. All this was paid off only half of the money from ticket sales. The concert itself was great, but James had huge debts that had to be closed as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Julia to look at her lover. During this period, he looked confused, anxious. I wanted to help him at least something. But how? Where did Julia get the money from? James took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him. The situation improved, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Julia offered to help. She had savings, money she was saving for her studies. Not much, of course, but still. In addition, the girl did what she had been against for a long time. She took out a consumer loan. These funds were quite enough to close the debt. From where? Surprised James when Julia handed him several packs of new crispy bills. Well, just out of the blue, my debt was paid off, plus the insurance. Finally paid off the cell phone case money. The girl lied. She knew. If she told James the truth, He'd never take her money. And so it wasn't like it was the last one that came in by accident. "Thank you." James hugged Julia tightly. "I'll pay you back. You'll see, we'll be famous soon, and I'll pay it all back." James paid the debt and continued to develop the band. Julia slowly paid off the loan. It was no longer possible to save for school, and in general, the salary suddenly became much smaller. The bar had fallen on hard times. It was good that James bought groceries and paid the rent. That is, he took the main part of the expenses on himself. James' income came from a few corporate gigs and the occasional part-time job. Unstable earnings, but still does not dry up, and the stream is empty and then thick. Julia, not caring about the financial side of their relationship. She enjoyed James' attention, bathed in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, support. Julia tried not to think about the future, but not to recover in the university this year will do it next year. Nothing to worry about. She still had time. The most important thing is that he, James, is there for her. Julia didn't know she was capable of such feelings. And then James disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Julia. Nothing bad happened to him. It started out as a business trip. You can imagine, James grabbed Julia by the shoulder and even shook her a little. His eyes burned like two bright spotlights. You can imagine, I was invited to Germany to write music for a band. They found me on the internet, and they liked it. And now I'm invited. Julia couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band James was talking about. They were very popular musicians, touring all over the world. And they'd noticed James. They're offering him a partnership. Unbelievable. I'm going to have to go away for a while, James continued. Do you realize what that means? Julia nodded. She understood the money, the fame, the dizzying opportunities for James to grow and develop as a musician. Useful acquaintances and connections. James would get things he'd never dreamed of, but it looks like they're going to have to part ways indefinitely. After all, James clearly said I have to leave me, not us. The packing started. James had a lot of things to sort out. First of all, finding a replacement. Someone has to play in his band in his place. Temporarily. While he was away, of course. Secondly, James had to apply for a passport and visa. Thirdly, packing. In all the hustle and bustle, he seemed to have forgotten all about Julia. James was too enthusiastic about the upcoming changes and prospects. The girl looked at him and realized he would forget about her. Forget about her. In another country, muted by new impressions, excited by work and success. Perhaps James would even find someone there. But James, he hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. Time will pass quickly, and then there's the video link. We'll be in constant contact with each other. At least I'll make some money, finally pay you back in a decent way. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we can even buy an apartment. My band will get bigger. I'll gain invaluable experience. I'll know how to do things. Everything's gonna be fine. James truly believed that. Julia saw it. He wasn't lying, he wasn't bullshitting. But something told the girl that everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. It's just that James himself doesn't realize it yet. That's how it turned out in the end. At first, James called every day, as promised, telling her how to settle in at the new place. Everything thrilled him, the experience overwhelmed him. And then he suddenly dropped off the radar. He just disappeared. He didn't call or answer Julia's calls. Long rings steadily ended with the message that the subscriber, apparently busy and therefore cannot answer. Julia was alarmed at first. I thought that something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw a fresh performance of that band on the music channel. James was with them. He was very different, mature, and even more serious than usual. I mean, there was nothing wrong with him. It's just that he'd apparently decided to start a new life and cut off all his old ties, including forgetting about her. And Julia? At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain everything. But James disappeared completely out of her life. Julia made it a habit to watch the music channel every day. Every once in a while, she'd see James. He was never the center of attention, but he still got in the camera lens sometimes. And quite often the girl next to him was the same girl, either a makeup artist or the band's costumer. Beautiful, bright. Apparently, there was something between her and James. Julia was desperately jealous of James, both of this girl and of her lover's other potential husbands. She was hurt like she had never been hurt before, and also hurt and scared. Scared of being alone again without the support and warmth of a loved one. An unpleasant mixture of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems, more pressing. Moneylessness. Julia could barely make ends meet. She had a tiny salary and a loan. Eventually, the bar went bankrupt. The new owners bought it and set up Julia's Coca Lounge. She had to quit, like all the other employees. Another blow. Julia had special memories and feelings connected with this place. And now there was no cozy bar where you could always enjoy live music, where there was a friendly, warm atmosphere. James would understand, support her. Everything was easier and more pleasant with him in general. But he was hundreds of kilometers away from her and seemed to have forgotten all about her. James had no idea how desperate she was. He never found out about the loan. He thought Julia had helped him with the extra money she'd suddenly received. And of course, he has no idea she's been fired. And if he did, what would he care about her now? Julia had no time to go over the offenses and think about how it would be if she desperately needed a job, and preferably in a decently paid. And so the girl tirelessly scored the ads. Wanted to find something that would help to get out of the financial hole. Well, at least the landlord agreed to wait with payment. But he's got a lot of patience too. Julia will be asked to leave. This ad caught Julia's attention with the amount of money that was offered for the services. Not a bad figure. It could solve many of the girl's problems. But the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to Julia. A nurse was needed for a little girl. The sort of unhealthy diagnosis didn't agree, but the person who gave the ad made it clear the child needed round-the-clock supervision and care, including taking medication by the hour, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Julia wondered. She had experience in caring for babies. Thanks, Helen, her conclusion. The girl even enjoyed fiddling with her nephews. She knew how to get along with small children, knew how to feed them, change their clothes, keep them occupied. But here we were talking about a sick child, a seriously ill one by the looks of it. Could she do it? At least it was worth a try. Julia called the given number. She was answered by a pleasant male voice. The man asked her several questions: age, occupation, education, experience with small children.